A 42-year-old Montana rancher stands frozen on a train platform, wildflowers crushing in his fist, staring at the woman who just destroyed his future. She's wrapped in silk that costs more than his cattle, her hands trembling, eyes wide with terror. "I'm not her," she whispers. "I stole the letters. I stole everything." The bride he's been writing to for 6 months doesn't exist. The woman before him is a beautiful lie running from something worse than the frontier could ever be. He can send her back east to whatever's hunting her, or he can let a liar with secrets rip apart the life he bled to build. Either way, nothing will ever be the same. If you want to see how a stolen identity and a broken cowboy collide in the wildest territory in America, stay until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The July sun hammered down on Silver Hollow's train platform like punishment. Reed Calloway stood with his hat pulled low, sweat darkening the back of his work shirt and wildflowers wilting in his calloused hand. 42 years old, never married, owner of Broken Creek Ranch, 300 acres of Montana grassland that fought him every single day. He'd written letters for 6 months to a woman named Catherine Wells, a school teacher from Pennsylvania who said she wanted a simple life out west. Her words had been careful, practical, warm without being foolish. She'd written about teaching children, about wanting a quiet home, about understanding that frontier life meant hard work and harder winters. He'd liked her immediately. The train's whistle cut through the heat. Reed straightened, brushing dust off his shirt with one hand. Around him, the platform filled with the usual crowd. Ranch hands collecting supplies, families greeting relatives, the station master yelling about freight schedules. Reed ignored all of it. His eyes stayed locked on the passenger car doors. When they opened, his heart stopped. The woman who stepped onto the platform didn't belong anywhere near Montana. She wore a dress the color of deep emerald, silk that caught the light and shimmered like water. Her dark hair was pinned in an elaborate twist that must have taken an hour. Her face, Christ, her face, was the kind men wrote poems about. High cheekbones, full lips, eyes like smoke. She moved carefully, as if the wooden boards beneath her expensive boots might collapse. Reed's gut twisted. Something was wrong. She scanned the crowd, and when her eyes found him, they went wide. Not with joy, with fear. She walked toward him slowly, gripping a small traveling case with white knuckles. Up close, Reed could see the terror barely held beneath that beautiful face. She stopped 3 feet away and looked at him like he was holding a loaded gun. "Mr. Calloway." Her voice was soft, eastern, shaking. "That's me." Reed's hand tightened on the flowers. "You're Catherine Wells?" Her throat moved as she swallowed. "No." The word hit him like a fist. "No?" Reed's voice went flat. "Then who the hell are you?" "My name is Vivian Mercer." She spoke quickly, the words tumbling out like a confession she couldn't hold back. "I'm not the woman who wrote to you. Catherine Wells is real. She exists. But I stole her letters. I stole her identity. I needed to get out of New York, and I saw an opportunity, and I took it. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Reed stood there, flowers dangling from his hand, staring at this stranger in silk who'd just blown apart 6 months of hope. Around them, the platform kept moving. People laughed. The train hissed steam. The world continued like nothing had just shattered. "You stole her letters," Reed repeated slowly. "Yes." "You pretended to be someone else for half a year." "Yes." "And you came all the way to Montana? Why?" His voice was rising now, anger finally breaking through the shock. "For fun? For some kind of game?" "No." Vivian's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't let them fall. "I was desperate. I owed money to people who don't forgive debt. Dangerous people. I couldn't stay in New York. I couldn't go to anyone I knew. So I took Catherine's name and her ticket west, and I ran." Reed dropped the flowers. They hit the platform and scattered. "So you're running from debt?" "Yes." "And you figured some lonely rancher in Montana would be stupid enough to take you in?" "I didn't think that far ahead." Her voice broke. "I just needed to survive." "Well, congratulations." Reed's words came out cold and sharp. "You made it to Montana. Now you can get right back on that train and survive somewhere else." Vivian flinched. "Please, if I go back—" "Not my problem." Reed turned away, shoving past a man carrying luggage. His boots hit the platform hard. Behind him, he heard Vivian call his name, but he didn't stop, didn't look back. His hands were shaking with rage, humiliation, something worse than either. He'd spent months imagining a future with a woman who didn't exist. He'd let himself hope. That was the part that burned worst of all. He made it halfway to his horse before she caught up. "Mr. Calloway, please." Vivian grabbed his arm. Her grip was surprisingly strong for someone who looked like she'd never done a day's work. "I know you owe me nothing. I know what I did was unforgivable. But if you send me back, I'm dead. Maybe not today, but soon. The men I owe, they don't let people just walk away." Reed yanked his arm free. "Then you shouldn't have borrowed money you couldn't pay back." "You're right." Tears finally spilled down her cheeks, ruining whatever expensive powder she'd used. "You're absolutely right. I made terrible choices. But I'm standing here begging you anyway because I don't have anywhere else to go." "Go to the sheriff. Tell him your story." "And say what? That I committed fraud? That I'm running from criminals in another state?" Vivian laughed bitterly. "The law doesn't protect women like me." Reed looked at her, really looked. Beneath the silk and beauty and terror, he saw exhaustion. Dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide. The way her hands trembled, even when she tried to hold them still. She wasn't lying about being desperate. He could see it in every line of her body. But that didn't make it his problem. "Find someone else," Reed said quietly. "This town's got a church, a boarding house, plenty of folks who might help. But I'm not bringing a liar back to my ranch. I'm not starting a life with someone who built everything on deception." "I understand." Vivian stepped back, nodding. Her face had gone carefully blank, like she was used to doors closing in front of her. "Thank you for not calling the sheriff. That's more kindness than I deserve." She turned and walked back toward the platform, her silk dress catching dust, her small case hanging from one hand. Reed watched her go, told himself he'd made the right choice. She'd lied to him for months, used him as an escape plan without caring what it might do to him. She deserved whatever came next. He almost believed it. Reed rode back to Broken Creek in silence, the empty road stretching before him under the brutal sun. His ranch sat 5 miles outside Silver Hollow, tucked against the foothills where the grassland started climbing toward mountains. He'd built everything himself, the house, the barn, the fences. 15 years of backbreaking work. He'd wanted to share it with someone. Instead, he had 300 acres of land that felt lonelier than ever. That night, he couldn't sleep. He kept seeing Vivian's face when he told her to leave, the way hope had died in her eyes, the careful blankness that replaced it. "Not your problem," he reminded himself. She made her choices. But the image wouldn't leave him alone. 2 days later, Reed rode into Silver Hollow for supplies. The general store was busy, filled with ranchers and their families stocking up before the weekend. Reed grabbed flour, coffee, ammunition, trying to focus on the practical tasks in front of him. Then he heard the whispers. "That woman from the train, the one in the fancy dress, working at the church school now, can you believe it?" Reed's head snapped up. He found the 2 women talking, Martha Hendricks and her daughter Emily, both of them leaning close like they were sharing scandal. "Excuse me," Reed interrupted. "What woman?" Martha looked surprised to be addressed directly. "Oh, Mr. Calloway, we were just talking about that stranger who arrived Tuesday, Vivian something. Apparently she went straight to Pastor Grant and begged for work. He gave her a position helping at the school." "Helping how?" "Teaching the children, cleaning, whatever needs doing." Martha's expression was skeptical. "Though I can't imagine what a woman like that knows about frontier life. Did you see her dress? That was New York silk. I'd bet money on it." Reed paid for his supplies and left without another word. The church school sat at the edge of town, a simple wooden building with 6 windows and a bell tower. Reed tied his horse and walked around to the back, where he could hear children's voices reciting something in unison. Through the window, he saw her. Vivian stood at the front of the classroom, her silk dress replaced by a simple cotton one that hung slightly too loose. Her hair was pulled back in a practical braid instead of that elaborate twist. She held a primer in her hands and was helping a young boy sound out words, her voice patient, her attention completely focused. She looked exhausted. There were smudges under her eyes, and her hands had red marks, probably from scrubbing floors or hauling water. But she was still there, still fighting. Reed watched for another minute, then walked away before anyone noticed him. Over the next week, he heard more stories. Vivian had taken a room at the boarding house and was paying for it by working double shifts, teaching during the day, cleaning the church at night. She burned the first 3 meals she tried to cook at the boarding house, nearly started a fire, and cried in the kitchen until Mrs. Patterson showed her how to work the stove properly. She'd never washed clothes by hand before and ruined 2 sheets before figuring out the correct soap ratio. Her soft hands blistered, then bled, then slowly began to callous. "She's trying," Mrs. Patterson told Reed when he stopped by the boarding house for coffee. The older woman had a soft spot for strays, and Vivian apparently qualified. Poor thing doesn't know the first thing about living out here, but she's not giving up. That counts for something. "She's a liar," Reed said flatly. "Maybe," Mrs. Patterson poured him coffee without asking. "But she's a liar who's willing to work herself half to death rather than run away again. I've seen plenty of people with nowhere to go, Mr. Calloway. Most of them keep running." She planted her feet. Reed didn't have an answer for that. A week and a half after Vivian arrived, Reed rode into town and found the school closed. A small crowd had gathered near the church, and he could hear raised voices. He dismounted and pushed through until he saw what was happening. Vivian stood in the church doorway, facing down 3 men Reed recognized immediately. The Hollis brothers. Cattle rustlers, drunks, and troublemakers who spent more time in the sheriff's jail than out of it. The oldest, Jack, was leaning close to Vivian, his hand braced against the doorframe, blocking her exit. "Come on, sweetheart," Jack was saying. "We just want to get to know you. Pretty thing like you, all alone in a rough town. Please move." Vivian's voice was calm, but Reed could see the tension in her shoulders. "Or what?" Jack grinned. "You gonna tell the pastor on us?" Reed crossed the distance in 4 strides and grabbed Jack's shoulder, spinning him around. "She asked you to move." Jack's grin disappeared when he saw who it was. Reed Calloway had a reputation in Silver Hollow. Quiet, hardworking, but not someone you pushed, not if you were smart. "We were just talking," Jack muttered. "No, you were bothering her." Reed's voice stayed level. "Now you're leaving." The Hollis brothers exchanged glances, then backed off. Jack shot Vivian one last look, something ugly in his eyes, before the 3 of them walked away. The crowd dispersed, disappointed there wouldn't be a fight. Vivian looked at Reed. "Thank you." "Don't thank me." Reed's jaw was tight. "I didn't do it for you." "Then why did you do it?" "Because nobody deserves to be cornered by the Hollis brothers." He turned to leave, then stopped. "You should be more careful. Silver Hollow's not always friendly to strangers." "I'm learning that," Vivian said quietly. Reed looked at her, really looked, and saw what 2 weeks in Montana had done. Her hands were rough now, nails broken. There was a burn on her forearm from the stove. Her face had lost that porcelain softness, replaced by the beginning of a frontier tan. She didn't look like the terrified woman in silk anymore. She looked like someone fighting to survive. "You planning to stay?" Reed asked. "I don't have anywhere else to go," Vivian said. "So, yes, I'm staying," Reed nodded slowly. "Then you'd better learn how to protect yourself. Hollis brothers aren't the worst of what's out here." He walked away before she could respond. That night, Reed sat on his porch with whiskey and tried to make sense of what he felt. Anger, still. Betrayal, definitely. But underneath it, something else. Respect, maybe, or curiosity. Vivian Mercer had lied to him, used him, and shattered 6 months of hope. But she hadn't run when things got hard. She'd stayed and faced the consequences. Most people would have gotten back on that train. She'd chosen to stay and fight. Reed poured another whiskey and watched the stars come out over his empty ranch. The next morning, he rode into town with a plan he'd been arguing with himself about since dawn. He found Vivian at the school during the morning break, supervising children playing in the yard. She saw him coming and went still, like she expected bad news. "Miss Mercer," Reed said formally. "Mr. Calloway." "You still owe me an explanation." Vivian glanced at the children, then back at Reed. "I told you everything." "No, you told me you were running from debt. That's not an explanation. That's an excuse." Reed crossed his arms. "If you want to stay in Silver Hollow, if you want people to trust you, you're going to need to do better than that." "What do you want me to say?" "The truth." Reed's voice was hard. "All of it. Why you needed money, who you borrowed from, What you were doing that got you into debt in the first place. Vivian's face went pale. Why does it matter? Because I want to know if you're dangerous. I want to know if whoever's hunting you is going to show up here and put this town at risk. Reed stepped closer. You want to build a life in Silver Hollow? Then stop hiding behind secrets and prove you deserve it. Vivian looked at him for a long moment. Then she took a breath. My father owned a textile business in New York, she said quietly. When he died, I inherited everything. The business, the debt, the mess he'd hidden from everyone. The debt was to a man named Victor Crane. He's not a banker or a businessman. He's a criminal. He lends money at rates that guarantee you'll never pay it back. And when you can't, he takes everything, your business, your property, your life if necessary. And you couldn't pay. I tried. I sold everything, the house, the furniture, my mother's jewelry. It wasn't enough. Crane said I had 1 month to come up with $10,000, or he'd take payment another way. Vivian's voice dropped. He owns brothels, Mr. Calloway. Nice ones, expensive ones, but brothels all the same. That's where women go when they can't pay Victor Crane. Reed's stomach turned. So I ran, Vivian continued. I saw Catherine Wells's advertisement in the newspaper. Mail order bride wanted for Montana rancher. I met her at a tea shop, got her talking, learned enough to write letters in her voice. Then I stole her ticket and disappeared. Does Catherine know? She knows someone stole her identity. I expect she told you. Vivian met his eyes. I expect she's angry. She has every right to be. Reed shook his head. She didn't tell me anything. She never showed up. Vivian frowned. What do you mean? I mean Catherine Wells never contacted me. Never sent a telegram saying someone stole her place. Nothing. Reed's mind was working. Maybe she's in trouble too. Maybe Crane found her. No. Vivian's voice was sharp. If Crane had found Catherine, he'd have come after me. He hasn't, which means she's safe, and she doesn't know where I went. Or she's dead, Reed said bluntly. Vivian flinched but didn't argue. They both knew it was possible. So that's your truth, Reed said after a moment. You're a thief running from a criminal. You stole another woman's identity and maybe got her killed in the process. Yes. Vivian's voice was barely above a whisper. That's my truth. Reed should have walked away. Should have gone straight to the sheriff and told him everything. Instead, he stood there looking at this woman who'd ruined his plans and realizing something he didn't want to admit. He believed her. You're staying at the boarding house, Reed said. Yes. And you're working at the school. Yes. Then keep doing that. Keep your head down, do your work, and don't cause trouble. Reed turned to leave, then stopped. And if Crane or anyone from New York shows up in Silver Hollow, you tell me immediately. Understood? Vivian stared at him. Why are you helping me? I'm not helping you, Reed said roughly. I'm protecting this town. If you brought danger here, that's my business. It was a lie, and they both knew it. Over the next few weeks, Reed found himself watching. Not obviously. He didn't ride into town every day or seek Vivian out. But when he did come to Silver Hollow for supplies or business, his eyes tracked her. He saw her teaching children their letters with infinite patience. Saw her scrubbing the church steps until her hands bled. Saw her learning to cook, to clean, to survive on nothing. She never complained, never asked for special treatment, never acted like she deserved anything more than what she'd earned. The town started noticing too. Mrs. Patterson sang her praises at the general store. Pastor Grant told anyone who'd listen that Vivian was the best volunteer the school had ever had. Even the children loved her. She was strict but kind, pushing them to learn while making them feel safe. That Mercer woman's got spine, old Tom Fletcher said one afternoon at the saloon. Reed was there picking up a saddle repair, and Fletcher was holding court at the bar. Thought she'd run after a week. Hell, most Easterners don't last 2 days, but she's still here. She's still lying, someone else muttered. Came here under false pretenses. So what? Fletcher shot back. Half this town came here running from something. Difference is, she's not pretending anymore. She's doing the work. Reed listened and said nothing. Late August brought a crisis. A ranch family 10 miles north came down with fever, both parents and 2 of their children. Doc Williams rode out immediately, but he needed help. The family couldn't be left alone, and their youngest child was only 4 years old. The town put out a call for volunteers. Reed expected Martha Hendricks or Emily to step up. They were always first to help. Instead, Vivian appeared at Doc Williams' office with a bag packed. "I'll go," she said simply. Doc Williams looked skeptical. "It's hard work, Miss Mercer. Round-the-clock care, cooking, cleaning, tending the sick. You sure you're up for it?" "No," Vivian said honestly. "But I'll do it anyway." She rode out with Doc Williams that afternoon. Reed heard about it from Mrs. Patterson 2 days later. "Doc says she's a miracle," the older woman reported. "Hasn't slept more than a few hours, keeps the house running, keeps the children calm, follows every instruction he gives. He said without her, he'd have lost at least one of them." Reed absorbed that in silence. Vivian returned to Silver Hollow a week later. She looked like death, exhausted, pale, swaying in the saddle. But the ranch family had survived, all of them. Doc Williams told the whole town it was because of her. Reed found her at the boarding house that evening. She was sitting on the porch, staring at nothing, too tired to move. "Heard you saved a family," Reed said. Vivian looked up slowly. "Doc Williams saved them. I just helped." "That's not what he says." "Doc Williams is being generous." Reed sat down beside her. "Not close, but close enough." "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did." Vivian's voice was quiet but firm. "I'm trying to earn my place here. Every day I prove I'm not just a liar from New York, that's a day I get to stay." "You think that's how it works? You do enough good deeds and people forgive you?" "I think it's the only chance I have." Reed studied her profile in the fading light. She'd changed since stepping off that train. The terror was still there. He could see it in the tension she carried. But it was buried under something stronger now. Determination, grit, the kind of toughness you couldn't fake. "The town's starting to see it," Reed said finally. "See what?" "That you're not a coward." He stood, boots scraping wood. "Keep going. Don't stop." He left before she could respond. September came with cooler nights and the first hint of autumn. Reed found himself thinking about Vivian more than he wanted to admit. He told himself it was just curiosity, just making sure she wasn't causing trouble. But late at night, alone on his ranch, he knew better. He'd wanted a partner, someone steady and practical who understood frontier life. Catherine Wells had seemed perfect on paper, but Vivian Mercer, liar, fraud, desperate runaway, was proving to be something else entirely. She was real. Not perfect, not easy, but real in a way that letters could never be. Reed didn't know what to do with that knowledge. Late one afternoon, he rode into Silver Hollow and saw a commotion at the church. People were gathering, voices raised. Reed dismounted and pushed through the crowd until he saw what was happening. Vivian stood in the church doorway, and in front of her was a man Reed didn't recognize. Tall, well-dressed, with cold eyes, and an expensive gun on his hip. Not a rancher, not a drifter, someone from back east. "I told you," Vivian was saying, her voice shaking but steady. "You have the wrong person." "I don't think so." The man's voice was smooth, educated. "You match the description exactly. Vivian Mercer, wanted for fraud and theft in New York. There's a reward for information about your whereabouts." Reed's blood went cold. "I don't know who you're talking about," Vivian said. "My name is Catherine Wells." "Then you won't mind if I wire the authorities in New York and confirm." The man smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "I'm sure they'd be very interested to know where you've been hiding." Reed moved before he thought. He stepped forward, putting himself between Vivian and the stranger. "You got a problem, mister?" Reed's voice was flat and dangerous. The man looked at him. "No problem, just conducting business." "Business is done. Move along." "I don't think—" "I'm not asking." Reed's hand moved to his own gun, not drawing, just resting there. "Leave. Now." The stranger held his gaze for a long moment, then smiled again. "I'll be seeing you," he said to Vivian. Then he turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. Reed turned to Vivian. She was white as snow, shaking. "Inside," Reed ordered. "Now!" They went into the church. Reed closed the door behind them, cutting off the curious stares. "Who was that?" Reed demanded. "A bounty hunter." Vivian's voice was barely above a whisper. "Crane must have put a reward out." I thought I'd covered my tracks, but how much? What? How much is the reward? I don't know. Enough to make it worth hunting me. Reed paced, thinking fast. He'll wire New York. That buys us maybe a week before someone comes with a warrant. Us? Vivian looked at him, confusion in her eyes. You think I'm letting them drag you back to Victor Crane? Reed's voice came out harsher than he meant. That son of a bitch wants to put you in a brothel. That's not happening. Why do you care? The question was raw, desperate. I lied to you. I used you. You should hate me. Reed stopped pacing and looked at her directly. Maybe I should, but I don't. The words hung between them. What do we do? Vivian asked finally. We get you legal protection. Reed's mind was already working. If you're married, you're under your husband's name. Harder to track, harder to touch. Vivian's eyes went wide. I'm not suggesting anything. Reed cut her off. I'm stating facts. A married woman has more protection than a single one running from debt. But you don't want to marry me. You made that very clear. I don't want a liar in my house, Reed corrected. But you're not the same person who stepped off that train. You proved that. So what are you saying? Reed took a breath. This was insane, reckless, everything he'd sworn he wouldn't do. I'm saying if you want protection, I'll give it to you. We get married, put your name in the county records as my wife, and anyone from New York has to go through me to get to you. You do that? Vivian's voice broke. After everything? I do it to stop a woman from being sold into hell, whether that woman lied to me or not. Reed looked away. But I'm not offering you love, Vivian. I'm offering you safety. That's all. Tears spilled down her cheeks. That's more than I deserve. Probably. Reed moved toward the door, then stopped. Think about it. But think fast. That bounty hunter isn't giving up. He left her standing in the church and walked out into the fading sunlight with his heart pounding and his mind screaming that he just made the biggest mistake of his life. But as he rode back to Broken Creek Ranch, alone under the vast Montana sky, Reed realized something. He didn't regret it. Not even a little bit. Vivian didn't sleep that night. She sat in her small room at the boarding house, staring at the wall, replaying Reed's words over and over. Marriage, protection, safety, in exchange for a name change and a legal document that would tie her to a man who'd made it clear he didn't love her and probably never would. It was more than she deserved. It was also the only option she had. By dawn, she'd made her decision. She found Reed 2 days later at the general store, loading supplies into his wagon. He saw her coming and went still, his hand frozen on a sack of flour. I'll do it, Vivian said without preamble. I'll marry you. Reed set the flour down carefully. Around them, the store went quiet. Mrs. Patterson stopped sweeping. 2 ranchers by the counter turned to stare. Not here, Reed said quietly. He jerked his head toward the door. Outside. They walked to the edge of town where the road turned toward open grassland. Reed stopped near a stand of cottonwoods and finally looked at her directly. You sure about this? He asked. No. Vivian's honesty seemed to surprise him. But I'm out of choices. That bounty hunter won't be the last. Crane has money and patience. If I stay single, stay visible, someone will eventually collect that reward. And you're willing to tie yourself to a stranger just to avoid that. You're not a stranger anymore. Vivian met his eyes. You're the only person in this town who knows the whole truth and hasn't turned me in. That counts for something. Reed studied her face like he was searching for a lie. This won't be a real marriage. I know. You'll have my name and my protection, but that's all. I'm not offering you a home at the ranch. You'll stay in town, keep working at the school, live your own life. The word stung, but Vivian kept her expression neutral. I understand. And if this doesn't work, if Crane or his people come anyway, I'm not dying for you. I'll protect you as much as I can, but I won't throw my life away. I wouldn't ask you to. Reed nodded slowly. Then we'll do it quiet. No announcement, no celebration. Just a quick ceremony at the courthouse with witnesses. When? Tomorrow. Before that bounty hunter sends his telegram. Reed's jaw was tight. And Vivian, once we do this, there's no going back. You'll be stuck with my name until one of us dies or we get a divorce. You ready for that?" "Are you?" she countered. For a long moment, Reed didn't answer. Then he turned and walked back toward his wagon. "Be at the courthouse tomorrow at noon. Don't be late." The wedding took 15 minutes. Judge Morrison performed the ceremony in his cramped office with Mrs. Patterson and Doc Williams as witnesses. Vivian wore the same simple cotton dress she'd worn to teach school that morning. Reed wore his work clothes, still dusty from the ranch. There were no flowers, no music, no kiss at the end. Just signatures on paper and a curt nod from the judge. "You're legally married now," Morrison said, stamping the document. "Congratulations." The word felt wrong. Reed signed the marriage certificate without meeting Vivian's eyes, his handwriting sharp and precise. When Vivian added her name, Vivian Calloway now, no longer Mercer, her hand shook. Mrs. Patterson hugged her afterward. "Welcome to the family, dear." Vivian didn't know what family she meant. Reed had already walked outside. She found him by his wagon, checking the harness straps with unnecessary focus. "Thank you," Vivian said quietly. "Don't thank me yet." Reed didn't look up. This might not work. "It's still more than I had yesterday." Reed finally met her eyes. Something flickered in his expression. Not warmth, but not coldness either. Something complicated and unreadable. "Go back to the boarding house. Keep your routine. Act like nothing changed." "What about you?" "I'm going back to the ranch." He climbed into the wagon. "If anyone asks, tell them we got married for practical reasons. No point hiding it. The whole town will know by sunset anyway." He drove away without another word, leaving Vivian standing alone in the dusty street with a marriage certificate in her hand and a name that still felt foreign. By evening, just as Reed predicted, all of Silver Hollow knew. Vivian returned to the boarding house and found Mrs. Patterson waiting with fresh coffee and barely concealed excitement. "A wedding," the older woman said, beaming. "And here I thought you two hated each other." "We don't hate each other." Vivian sat down heavily. "We barely know each other." "Then why marry?" Vivian had prepared for this question. "Because I needed protection, and he needed—" She stopped. What did Reed need? What had she possibly offered him in exchange for his name and the target it painted on his back? "He needed to do the right thing," Mrs. Patterson finished gently. That's Reed Calloway through and through. Man's got a hero streak, whether he admits it or not. "I'm nobody's damsel," Vivian said, more sharply than intended. "Never said you were, dear." Mrs. Patterson poured coffee. "But you were in trouble, and Reed doesn't walk away from trouble, especially not when it involves women being threatened. He made it very clear this isn't a real marriage." "Oh, honey," Mrs. Patterson laughed softly. "Marriage is whatever two people make it. You've got time to figure out what that means." Vivian sipped her coffee and said nothing. Time felt like a luxury she couldn't afford. The bounty hunter left town 3 days later. Vivian saw him ride out from the schoolhouse window, his horse loaded with supplies and his face set in a scowl. Whether he'd sent his telegram or decided the reward wasn't worth the effort, she didn't know. What mattered was that he was gone. For now. The town treated her differently after the wedding. Not better exactly, but with a cautious respect that hadn't existed before. Being Reed Calloway's wife gave her a legitimacy that months of hard work hadn't quite achieved. The whispers continued, but they changed tone. People stopped questioning why she was in Silver Hollow and started asking when she'd move out to Broken Creek Ranch. Vivian never had an answer for that. Reed came to town once a week for supplies. Sometimes Vivian saw him at the general store or the saloon. He'd nod at her, polite, distant, and continue with his business. They didn't speak beyond basic pleasantries. To anyone watching, they looked like strangers who happened to share a last name. It shouldn't have hurt. Vivian had agreed to this arrangement. She'd known exactly what she was getting. But late at night, alone in her boarding house room, she couldn't help wondering what it would be like if the marriage was real. If Reed looked at her with something other than cautious obligation. If she had a home to go to instead of a single rented room. She buried those thoughts fast. Wanting things she couldn't have was what got her into trouble in the first place. October arrived with frost on the grass and shorter days. The school became Vivian's entire world. She threw herself into teaching with an intensity that surprised even Pastor Grant. She developed new lesson plans, organized a small library of donated books, and stayed late every evening to tutor children who struggled with reading. The kids loved her. That was the part that caught her off guard. Back in New York, Vivian had barely thought about children. They'd been abstract concepts, things other women dealt with. But here, watching a 10-year-old girl finally sound out her first complete sentence, or seeing a shy boy gain confidence through learning, it changed something inside her. She belonged here, not perfectly, not easily, but she belonged in a way she'd never belonged anywhere else. "You're good at this," Pastor Grant told her one afternoon. He'd stopped by to drop off new primers and found Vivian helping 3 students with their arithmetic. "Better than I expected, honestly." "You thought I'd quit," Vivian said. "I thought you'd try your best and discover frontier teaching wasn't what you imagined." Grant smiled. "I'm glad I was wrong." "So am I." That evening, Vivian walked back to the boarding house and found Reed's horse tied outside. Her heart kicked against her ribs. He'd never come to see her before, never sought her out deliberately. She found him on the porch, hat in his hands, looking uncomfortable. "Is something wrong?" Vivian asked immediately. "No, I just—" Reed stopped, started again. "I wanted to check on you, make sure that bounty hunter hasn't come back." "He hasn't." "Good." Reed stood. "That's good." He moved to leave, but Vivian stepped forward. "Wait, can I ask you something?" Reed turned back slowly. "What?" "Why did you really marry me?" The question came out before she could stop it. "You said protection, but you could have just vouched for me, told people I was under your watch. You didn't have to tie yourself legally to a woman you don't trust." Reed's expression closed off. "Does it matter?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because I need to know if you hate this." Vivian's voice cracked despite her best efforts. "If you regret it. If every time you see me, you wish you'd left me on that train platform." Reed stared at her for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough. "I don't hate you, Vivian, and I don't regret marrying you." "Then what do you feel?" "I don't know." The admission seemed to cost him. "You're not what I wanted, not what I planned for, but you're here and you're trying, and that's—" He stopped. "That's more than most people do." It wasn't a declaration of love. It wasn't even particularly warm. But coming from Reed, it felt like the truth. "I'm trying," Vivian agreed quietly. "Every single day." Reed nodded. Then he put his hat back on and walked to his horse. He mounted smoothly, then looked down at her one last time. "Keep doing that," he said. "Keep trying." He rode away into the gathering darkness, and Vivian stood on the porch feeling like something had shifted between them. Something small, but real. 2 weeks later, the school held a harvest festival. Parents brought food, children performed songs they'd learned, and the whole town gathered to celebrate. Vivian spent days preparing her students, teaching them a folk song she'd learned from one of the ranch families. When they performed, voices slightly off-key but earnest, the crowd actually applauded. Afterward, Martha Hendricks approached her. The older woman had been one of Vivian's harshest critics when she first arrived. Now she looked almost friendly. "That was lovely," Martha said. "You've done good work with these children." "Thank you." Vivian was too surprised to say more. "I'll admit, I had my doubts about you." Martha's expression was frank. "Eastern woman, fancy clothes, showing up under false pretenses? I thought you'd run at the first sign of hardship." "I considered it," Vivian admitted. "But you didn't. And you married Reed Calloway, which couldn't have been easy. Man's more walls than windows." Martha smiled slightly. "But he's a good man. Stubborn, closed off, but good. You could do worse." Vivian didn't know how to respond to that. Fortunately, Martha moved on to talk with other parents, leaving Vivian alone with her thoughts. Across the yard, she spotted Reed. He'd come to town for supplies and apparently gotten pulled into the festival. He stood near the food tables looking supremely uncomfortable while Mrs. Patterson chatted at him. When his eyes found Vivian's across the crowd, something passed between them. Not quite acknowledgement, not quite connection, but something. Then a child tugged on Vivian's skirt, asking for help with a game, and the moment broke. That night, lying in bed, Vivian thought about Martha's words. "You could do worse." It wasn't exactly a ringing endorsement of her marriage, but it wasn't wrong either. Reed had given her safety when she had nothing. He'd asked for nothing in return except that she stay out of his life. The problem was Vivian was starting to realize she didn't want to stay out of his life. She wanted to know him, understand him, figure out what made a man offer marriage to a woman he barely tolerated just to keep her safe from monsters back east. She wanted more than a name on paper, but wanting and having were different things. Vivian had learned that lesson the hard way. November brought bitter cold and the first real snow. The school became harder to heat, and several children stopped coming because their families needed them for winter preparations. Vivian found herself with more free time than she wanted. Time meant thinking, and thinking meant dwelling on things she couldn't change. One afternoon, she was cleaning the schoolhouse when Pastor Grant appeared in the doorway. "Miss Vivian, or should I say Mrs. Calloway, do you have a moment?" "Of course." Vivian set down her broom. "What do you need?" "There's a situation." Grant looked uncomfortable. "The Brennan family? You know them?" Vivian nodded. The Brennans lived on a small ranch north of town. Their daughter Sarah was one of Vivian's students, bright, eager, always prepared. "James Brennan hurt his leg badly," Grant continued. "Can't walk, can't work. Margaret's trying to manage the ranch alone with 3 children, but it's too much. They need help, and most folks are already stretched thin with their own preparations for winter." "What kind of help?" Vivian asked, though she already knew. "Everything. Cooking, cleaning, childcare. Margaret can't run the ranch and take care of James while he heals. Doc Williams says it'll be at least 6 weeks before he can put weight on that leg." "I'll go," Vivian said immediately. Grant looked surprised. "It's hard work, long days. You'd have to stay out there, not just visit." "I understand. And it's a ranch, Miss Vivian. Different from teaching school. You'd be doing everything Margaret can't handle while she keeps their livestock alive." "Pastor Grant." Vivian met his eyes. "I've spent the last 4 months learning how to survive on the frontier. I've burned bread, ruined clothes, and bled from work I didn't know how to do. But I learned, and now a family needs help, so I'm going." Grant studied her, then smiled. "Reed Calloway married a stubborn woman." "He married a desperate one," Vivian corrected. "The stubborn came later." She packed that evening and rode out to the Brennan Ranch at dawn. The property was smaller than Reed's, just 100 acres with a modest house and barn. Margaret Brennan met her at the door, exhaustion written in every line of her body. "Bless you for coming," Margaret said. "I didn't know how much longer I could manage." James was laid up in bed, his legs splinted and bandaged. He looked embarrassed to need help, but the pain in his face was real. Their 3 children, Sarah, Michael, and little Emma, watched Vivian with cautious hope. "What do you need me to do?" Vivian asked. "Everything," Margaret said honestly. "Watch the children, cook meals, keep the house running while I handle the animals and the outdoor work. James can't do anything, and I can't be in 2 places at once. Then show me where things are, and I'll get started." The first day was chaos. Vivian had learned to cook basic meals, but feeding a family of 5 3 times a day was different from making breakfast for herself. She burned the noon meal, under-seasoned the evening stew, and forgot to check on bread that turned into rocks in the oven. But she kept going. By the end of the first week, she'd found a rhythm. Wake before dawn, start the fire, cook breakfast, get the children ready for lessons, clean while they studied, prepare lunch, supervise chores, start dinner, help with evening tasks, collapse into bed. Then do it all again. Her hands, already rough from months of frontier work, developed new calluses. Her back ached from hauling water and scrubbing floors. But something surprising happened. She got good at it, not perfect. She still made mistakes, forgot to close the chicken coop one evening, and spent an hour chasing hens in the dark. Accidentally used salt instead of sugar in a pie that became legendary for its awfulness. But she learned, adapted, figured it out through trial and error and sheer determination. Margaret noticed. "You're different from when you arrived," she said one evening while they folded laundry together. "Different how?" "Stronger, more sure of yourself." Margaret smiled. "When you first came to town, you looked like a scared rabbit. Now you look like you could take on the world." "I don't feel that way," Vivian admitted. "That's because you're living it. You don't see the change while it's happening." 2 weeks into her stay at the Brennan Ranch, Reed showed up. Vivian was in the yard teaching Emma how to feed the chickens when she heard hoofbeats. She looked up and saw Reed riding in, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Calloway," she said, surprised. "Mrs. Calloway," Reed dismounted. "Heard you were out here." "Helping the Brennans while James heals." Reed looked around the property, taking in the well-maintained yard, the smoke rising from the chimney, the children playing happily nearby. His eyes came back to Vivian. "How's it going?" he asked. "I'm managing." "That's not what I asked." Vivian set down the chicken feed. "It's hard, harder than teaching, but I'm learning." "You didn't have to volunteer for this." "Yes, I did." Vivian met his eyes. "The Brennans needed help, and I can provide it. That's reason enough." Something in Reed's expression shifted. "You've changed." "Everyone keeps saying that, because it's true." Reed stepped closer, close enough that she could see the tension in his jaw. "The woman who stepped off that train wouldn't have lasted a day out here. Hell, I didn't think you'd last a week in town." "Neither did I," Vivian said honestly. "But you did. You're still here, still fighting." "What else was I supposed to do?" Reed didn't answer immediately. He just looked at her, really looked, like he was seeing something he hadn't expected to find. "I came to check on you," he said finally. "Make sure you were all right." "I'm fine." "You sure? Because if the work's too much—" "It's not." Vivian straightened her shoulders. "I can handle it." Reed nodded slowly. Then, to her shock, he smiled. Small, barely there, but real. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I think you can." He stayed for dinner. Margaret insisted, and Reed didn't fight it. They sat around the cramped kitchen table. Vivian, Reed, Margaret, James propped in a chair with his leg elevated, and the three children. It was loud and chaotic, and nothing like the formal meals Vivian remembered from New York. It felt like family. Reed sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. He didn't say much, but he listened when the children talked, helped clear plates after the meal, and complimented Vivian's cooking in a way that made her ridiculously pleased despite knowing the stew was merely adequate. When he left that evening, he paused by his horse. "Vivian," she turned. "Yes?" "You're doing good work here. The Brennans are lucky to have you. They're giving me a place to prove myself." "You already proved yourself." Reed swung into the saddle. "You just didn't realize it." He rode away before she could respond, and Vivian stood in the darkening yard feeling warmth spread through her chest despite the November cold. The rest of her time at the Brennan Ranch passed in a blur of work and exhaustion. James's leg healed slowly, and Margaret ran herself ragged keeping the ranch operational. But they survived. Together, the three adults kept everything running, and the children stayed fed and warm and mostly happy. When Vivian finally returned to Silver Hollow 6 weeks after she'd left, the town looked different. Or maybe she was different. She rode in at dusk, her clothes worn, her hands rough, her entire body aching. Mrs. Patterson met her at the boarding house with hot food and a warm fire. "Welcome back, dear. How are the Brennans?" "Managing now. James can walk again, and Margaret's caught up on the work." "And you?" Mrs. Patterson studied her. "How are you?" Vivian thought about that. 4 months ago, she'd stepped off a train wearing silk and terror. Now she stood in a borrowed room wearing worn cotton and calluses, married to a man she barely knew, with a name that felt both foreign and right. "I'm surviving," Vivian said finally. "That's more than some people do out here." Mrs. Patterson handed her a cup of tea. "Your husband stopped by twice while you were gone. Wanted to know when you'd be back." Vivian's heart kicked. "Did he say why?" "No, but he looked worried." That night, Vivian slept deeply for the first time in weeks. When she woke, dawn light was streaming through her window, and someone was knocking on her door. She opened it to find Reed standing in the hallway, hat in hands, looking like he'd been arguing with himself. "Morning," he said roughly. "Good morning." Vivian was acutely aware she was still in her nightgown, hair loose and tangled. "Is something wrong?" "No, I just—" Reed stopped, started again. "I wanted to see if you made it back all right." "I'm fine." "Good." He didn't move to leave. "The Brennans?" "James is walking. They'll manage the winter." "That's good." They stood there in uncomfortable silence. Then Reed cleared his throat. "I've been thinking," he said carefully, "about our arrangement." Vivian's stomach dropped. "You want a divorce?" "What?" "No." Reed looked startled. "Why would you think that?" "Because you got what you wanted. I'm safe. You did your good deed, and now—" "Vivian," Reed cut her off. "That's not what I meant." Then what did you mean? Reed took a breath. I meant that maybe our arrangement should change. Maybe you should come out to the ranch. See if you want to. He stopped, looking pained. See if you want to try making this marriage real. Vivian stared at him. What? You heard me. But you said, you made it clear. I know what I said. Reed's jaw was tight. But that was months ago. Things are different now. How? You're different. I'm different. Reed met her eyes. And I'm tired of pretending we're strangers when we're legally tied together. So I'm offering you a choice. Come to the ranch. Give this marriage a real chance. Or stay in town. Keep things as they are, and we'll figure out something else. Vivian's mind raced. This was what she'd wanted, what she'd been afraid to even hope for. But now, faced with it, she felt terror mixing with hope. I need time, she said finally. Take it. Reed put his hat back on. But Vivian, don't take too long. Winter's coming hard, and I'd rather know where we stand before the snow makes the roads impassable. He left without another word, and Vivian closed the door with shaking hands. The choice was hers. Stay safe in town with a marriage that was only paper, or risk everything by trying to build something real with a man who'd spent months keeping her at arm's length. Outside her window, the first snow of December began to fall. Vivian stood at her window for hours that night, watching snow gather on the street below. Reed's offer circled through her mind like a bird that couldn't find a place to land. Come to the ranch. Try making this real. The words should have brought relief, even joy. Instead, they brought fear. She'd survived the last 4 months by keeping expectations low. She'd learned to cook, to clean, to teach children and manage crisis after crisis without falling apart. But those were skills, tasks she could measure and improve. A real marriage with Reed Calloway wasn't something you could learn from a textbook or master through repetition. It required trust, vulnerability, letting someone see all the broken parts she'd spent years hiding. What if she wasn't capable of that anymore? By morning, she still hadn't decided. She went to the school and taught her lessons by rote, her mind elsewhere. The children noticed her distraction. Little Sarah Brennan asked if she was sick. Vivian forced a smile and said she was just tired. That afternoon, Doc Williams came to the school looking for her. Mrs. Calloway, I need your help. His face was drawn with exhaustion. There's a situation at the Henderson Ranch. Emma Henderson's in labor, but it's not going well. The baby's coming wrong and I need extra hands. You helped me before with the fever outbreak. You willing to help again? Vivian didn't hesitate. Of course. They rode out immediately, pushing through snow that was already several inches deep. The Henderson Ranch was 12 miles west, and by the time they arrived, night had fallen and the temperature had dropped to brutal cold. Inside the small ranch house, Emma Henderson lay on a bed, her face gray with pain and exhaustion. Her husband Paul hovered nearby, looking terrified and useless. Doc Williams went straight to work, examining Emma while firing questions. How long has she been in labor? Since yesterday morning, Paul said. We hoped it would happen on its own, but the baby's breech, Doc Williams said grimly. He looked at Vivian. I need to turn it. It's going to be difficult, and Emma's going to need someone to keep her calm and breathing properly. Can you do that? Yes. For the next 3 hours, Vivian lived in a nightmare. Emma screamed and cried and begged for the pain to stop. Doc Williams worked with steady, careful hands, trying to reposition the baby while Vivian held Emma's hand and talked her through breathing exercises she barely understood herself. Paul stood in the corner, white as snow, praying or cursing or both. You're doing well, Vivian said over and over, her voice steady even as her heart hammered. Just breathe. Stay with me. You're so strong, Emma. Just a little longer. Emma gripped her hand hard enough to hurt. I can't do this. Yes, you can. You are doing it. I'm going to die. You're not going to die. Vivian leaned close, forcing Emma to meet her eyes. I won't let you. Do you hear me? You're going to live and you're going to meet your baby, and years from now you'll tell this story and laugh about how dramatic you were. Emma choked out something between a laugh and a sob. Doc Williams worked silently, sweat on his brow despite the cold. Then, suddenly, he nodded. Got it. The baby's turned. Emma, next contraction, you need to push. Hard as you can. What happened next was chaos and blood and screaming that Vivian knew would haunt her dreams. But then, impossibly, there was a different sound. A baby crying, loud and angry and alive. "It's a girl," Doc Williams said, holding up a tiny, squirming infant. "You've got a daughter, Emma." Emma collapsed back on the bed, sobbing with relief. Paul rushed forward, tears streaming down his face. Vivian stepped back, her hands shaking, her dress stained with blood. Doc Williams handed the baby to Emma, then turned to Vivian. "You did good work tonight," he said quietly. "Real good work." Vivian couldn't speak. She just nodded. They stayed through the night to make sure both Emma and the baby were stable. By dawn, mother and child were sleeping peacefully, and Doc Williams declared them out of danger. Paul thanked them with tears in his eyes and promised to name the baby after Vivian if his wife agreed. The ride back to Silver Hollow was silent. Vivian was exhausted beyond words, but her mind wouldn't stop replaying the birth, the terror, the pain, the impossible moment when life appeared from suffering. "You ever think about having children?" Doc Williams asked suddenly. Vivian looked at him, startled. "I don't know. I never thought I'd have the chance. You're married now. It's possible." "Reed and I aren't—" She stopped. "How did you explain that your marriage was legal but not real, that you slept in separate towns and barely spoke except when crisis forced you together?" "It's complicated. Marriage usually is." Doc Williams smiled slightly. "But from what I've seen, you and Reed are more suited than you think. You're both stubborn, both tough, both terrible at asking for what you want." "That doesn't sound like a compliment." "It's not. It's an observation." The doctor glanced at her. "Reed's a good man, Vivian, closed off, damaged in ways he won't talk about, but good. And you're stronger than you give yourself credit for. Might be worth seeing what you could build together if you both stopped being so scared." Vivian didn't respond. She was too tired to argue. And besides, Doc Williams wasn't wrong. When they reached Silver Hollow, dawn was breaking cold and bright. Vivian went straight to the boarding house and collapsed into bed, still wearing her blood-stained dress. She slept for 12 hours straight. She woke to knocking. Mrs. Patterson's voice came through the door. "Vivian, someone's here to see you." Vivian dragged herself out of bed, changed into clean clothes, and went downstairs. Reed stood in the parlor, hat in hands, looking uncomfortable. "Heard you helped deliver Emma Henderson's baby," he said. "Doc Williams did the hard part." "That's not what Paul told everyone in town." Reed's expression was unreadable. "Said you saved his wife's life, kept her calm when she wanted to give up." Vivian shrugged. "I just talked to her?" "You did more than that." Reed stepped closer. "You keep doing more than that. Every time someone needs help, you step up. The Brennan family, the fever outbreak. Now this. You could have said no. Could have stayed safe and let someone else take the risk." "What's your point?" "My point is, you're not the woman who stepped off that train." Reed's voice was rough. "That woman was scared and desperate and lying about everything. This woman, you're someone I'd trust with my life." The words hit Vivian like a physical blow. "Reed, I asked you to come to the ranch," he continued. "Asked you to try making this marriage real. But I did it wrong. Made it sound like I was doing you a favor, offering you charity. That's not what I meant." "Then what did you mean?" Reed took a breath. "I meant, I want you there. Not because you need protection or because it's the right thing to do. Because I want to know what it's like to have you in my home. To eat dinner with you every night. To wake up knowing you're nearby instead of 5 miles away in town." Vivian's heart was racing. "You barely know me. I know you lied to me for months and then spent 4 more months proving you're nothing like I expected. I know you're stubborn and proud and too damn brave for your own good. I know when you smile at those kids at school, you look like someone who finally found where they belong." Reed's jaw was tight. "And I know I'm terrible at this, at talking, at feelings, at any of it, but I'm asking anyway. Come to the ranch. Give us a real chance." "I'm scared," Vivian said quietly. "Of what?" "Of trying and failing. Of disappointing you. Of—" She stopped. "Of caring about someone and losing them. I've lost everything before, Reed. My father, my business, my entire life in New York. If I let myself care about you and this falls apart, I don't know if I could survive it." Reed was quiet for a long moment. Then he did something completely unexpected. He closed the distance between them and took her hand. His palm was rough, calloused from years of ranch work. His grip was solid. "I can't promise it won't be hard," he said. "Can't promise we won't fight or struggle or make mistakes. But I can promise I won't abandon you. You want to know why I married you? Really?" "Yes." "Because the first time I saw you refuse to give up, when everyone expected you to run and you stayed anyway, I recognized something. You fight like someone who's got nothing left to lose. I've lived that way for years, built my whole life around it." Reed's thumb brushed across her knuckles. "But maybe we could try fighting for something instead of against everything, together." Vivian looked at their joined hands. Hers were rough now, scarred from work and survival. His were even rougher, marked by a lifetime of labor. They matched. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay? I'll come to the ranch." She met his eyes. "I'll try." Reed's expression cracked into something that might have been relief or joy or both. "When?" "Give me a week to finish the school term and find someone to cover my classes." Vivian squeezed his hand. "Then I'm yours." The words hung between them, weighted with meaning neither of them wanted to examine too closely. Reed nodded once, released her hand, and stepped back. "1 week," he said. "I'll be here to get you." He left, and Vivian stood in the boarding house parlor feeling like she'd just jumped off a cliff without knowing if there was water below. Mrs. Patterson appeared from the kitchen, smiling. "About time." "Were you eavesdropping?" "Of course I was. This is my house." The older woman hugged Vivian. "You're making the right choice, dear." "How do you know?" "Because you're terrified. The good choices are always terrifying." The next week passed in a blur. Vivian taught her final lessons, trained Martha Hendricks's daughter to take over the school temporarily, and packed her few belongings. The town threw her a small farewell dinner at the church. People she barely knew came up to wish her well, to thank her for helping their children learn or for assisting during crises. "You'll be missed," Pastor Grant said. "But I'm glad you're finally going home." Home. The word felt foreign and right at the same time. Reed arrived exactly 1 week later at dawn, driving a wagon loaded with supplies. Vivian climbed up beside him with her trunk and a basket of food Mrs. Patterson had insisted she take. As they drove out of Silver Hollow, Vivian looked back at the town that had become her refuge. "Nervous?" Reed asked. "Terrified," Vivian admitted. "Good. Means you're paying attention." The ride to Broken Creek Ranch took an hour through snow-covered grassland. The sun rose slowly, painting everything gold and white. Reed didn't talk much, but the silence wasn't uncomfortable. He pointed out landmarks, the creek that bordered his property, the stand of cottonwoods where he'd built his first shelter, the meadow where his cattle grazed in summer. Then they crested a rise, and Vivian saw it. Broken Creek Ranch spread out below them, tucked against foothills with mountains rising in the distance. The house was bigger than she'd expected, built from logs and stone, with a wide porch and smoke rising from the chimney. The barn stood nearby, solid and well-maintained. Fences marked pastures where a few cattle grazed despite the cold. "You built all this?" Vivian asked. "Over 15 years. There was pride in Reed's voice. Every fence post, every board. Did most of it alone. It's beautiful. It's functional." But Reed looked pleased. He helped her down from the wagon, and they walked to the house together. Reed opened the door and stepped back, letting her enter first. Inside was warm and clean, but clearly a bachelor's space. Sparse furniture, practical layout, no decoration beyond what was necessary. The kitchen was well organized, but showed signs of cooking for one. The main room had a large fireplace, a worn sofa, and a desk covered in papers. "It's not much," Reed said, suddenly uncertain. "It's honest." Vivian turned to face him. "Just like you." Reed showed her the rest of the house. 2 bedrooms upstairs, a washroom, storage spaces. He'd clearly prepared for her arrival. The second bedroom had fresh linens, a clean dresser, curtains he must have bought in town. It was separate from his room, giving her privacy and space. "You'll sleep here," Reed said. Until... He stopped, looking frustrated. "You decide when things change. No pressure." "Thank you." They spent the rest of the day in awkward domesticity. Reed showed her how the kitchen worked, where supplies were kept, how to manage the stove. Vivian cooked dinner, simple but edible, and they ate together at the small table. Conversation came in fits and starts, both of them trying too hard. "This is strange," Vivian said finally. "Yeah, we're married, but we don't know how to be married." "We'll figure it out." Reed pushed his plate away. "Trial and error, same as everything else." That night, Vivian lay in her new bed listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch. Wind against the house, cattle lowing in the distance, Reed moving around downstairs. She felt untethered, caught between the life she'd left and one she hadn't quite entered yet. But she was here. She'd made the choice. Now she had to live with it. Morning came early. Reed woke her before dawn, already dressed for work. "I've got to check the cattle," he said. "There's food in the kitchen if you're hungry. Feel free to look around. Get comfortable." He left before she could respond. Vivian dressed quickly and went downstairs to find the house empty. She made coffee and eggs, cleaned the dishes, and then stood in the middle of the main room wondering what to do next. She decided to explore. The barn first. It smelled like hay and animals and work, organized but clearly functional rather than decorative. Tools hung on walls, saddles sat on racks, supplies were stacked in neat rows. Reed's horse occupied one stall, nickering softly when Vivian approached. "Hey there," she said, offering her hand. The horse sniffed her palm, then allowed her to stroke its nose. She explored the rest of the ranch, walking through snow to see the property lines, the creek that gave the ranch its name, the meadows that would turn green in spring. It was isolated but not lonely, beautiful but harsh. Exactly the kind of place that would either break someone or forge them into something stronger. Reed returned at noon, looking surprised to find her in the barn feeding his horse. "You don't have to do that," he said. "I want to learn." Vivian set down the feed bucket. "If I'm going to live here, I should know how things work." Something in Reed's expression softened. "All right, come on, I'll show you." He spent the afternoon teaching her ranch basics. How to feed the animals properly, how to muck stalls, how to check fences for damage. Vivian's soft hands, which had finally calloused from months of town work, developed new blisters. She slipped twice in the snow, once falling hard enough to bruise her hip. Reed helped her up without comment, just steady hands and a careful grip. By evening, Vivian was exhausted and aching. Reed made dinner this time, simple stew that was surprisingly good, and they ate in comfortable silence. "You did well today," Reed said as they cleaned up. "I fell twice and couldn't figure out the gate latch. You also fed 6 animals without being told, carried water without complaining, and asked questions instead of pretending you knew everything." Reed dried the last dish. "That's better than most people do their first day." Vivian smiled despite her exhaustion. "Tomorrow, I'll try not to fall." "Tomorrow you'll probably fall 3 times, but you'll get up every time. That's what matters." The days fell into a rhythm. Reed worked the ranch, and Vivian learned alongside him. She wasn't strong enough for the heavy labor, but she could manage the daily tasks, feeding animals, collecting eggs, maintaining the house. She cooked meals that improved slowly, from barely edible to actually good. She learned which tools were which, how to read weather patterns, when to bring animals into shelter. She fell countless times, made mistakes that ranged from minor to nearly catastrophic. The first time she let a gate swing shut on Reed's hand, she nearly cried with guilt. He just wrapped his bruised fingers and told her to be more careful next time. "I'm terrible at this," Vivian said one night after burning dinner so badly they had to eat bread and cheese instead. "You're learning," Reed corrected. "There's a difference." "How long until I'm actually good at this?" "Years, probably. I've been doing it for 15 and I still make mistakes." Reed looked at her across the table. "But you're trying, and that's what counts. Most people would have quit by now." "I'm stubborn. I've noticed." There was warmth in his voice now, something that hadn't been there before. They were getting closer, not in grand romantic gestures or dramatic declarations, but in small daily moments. Reed showing her how to saddle a horse properly, Vivian mending his torn shirt without being asked, shared meals where conversation came easier, evenings by the fire where comfortable silence replaced awkward tension. 2 weeks after Vivian arrived at the ranch, a blizzard warning came through town. Reed rode in for emergency supplies and returned with news. Storm's coming, he said. Bad one. We need to prepare. They spent the next day securing everything, bringing animals into shelter, stocking food and water, boarding up windows, chopping extra firewood. Reed worked with focused intensity, and Vivian matched his pace as best she could. By the time they finished, night had fallen and the first snow was beginning. How long will it last? Vivian asked. Could be days. Maybe a week. Reed secured the barn door. We're stuck here until it passes. The storm hit that night with brutal force. Wind howled around the house, rattling windows and doors. Snow fell so thick that visibility dropped to nothing. The temperature plummeted. Reed kept the fires burning, and Vivian made sure they had food and water within reach. By the second day, the isolation became real. They were trapped in the house together with nothing to do except wait. At first it was awkward, two people who still barely knew each other, forced into proximity. But gradually, they started talking. Really talking. Reed told her about building the ranch, about the first winter when he'd lived in a shelter that barely kept out the cold, surviving on determination and stubbornness. About the cattle he'd lost to disease, the fences destroyed by storms, the endless cycle of work and setback and rebuilding. Why stay? Vivian asked. Why not give up and go somewhere easier? Because it's mine. Reed stared into the fire. Everything I built with my own hands. Nobody gave it to me. Nobody can take it away. Out here, I'm not anyone's employee or tenant or charity case. I'm just me. Vivian understood that better than he knew. She told him about New York, about growing up wealthy but lonely, her father's business that looked successful but was rotting from within, about the slow horror of discovering the debt after he died, the desperate attempts to fix it, the moment she realized she was out of options. I thought about dying, she admitted quietly. Before I ran, thought it might be easier than what Crane would do to me. Reed went very still. What changed your mind? Spite, mostly. I refused to let him win. Vivian laughed bitterly. So I stole someone's identity and ran to Montana. Not sure that's much better. You survived, Reed said firmly. That's always better. On the third day, cabin fever started setting in. They were both restless, used to constant work and activity. Reed paced like a caged animal. Vivian organized things that didn't need organizing. They snapped at each other over nothing. She put a dish in the wrong place. He tracked snow through the kitchen, then apologized immediately after. This is ridiculous, Vivian said. We're fighting about dishes. I know. We should be able to survive 3 days together without losing our minds. You'd think. Reed ran a hand through his hair. I'm not good at sitting still. Neither am I. They looked at each other and started laughing. The tension broke. That night, they played cards by firelight. Reed taught her poker, and Vivian turned out to have a natural talent for bluffing. They played for matches since neither had money, and by midnight, Vivian had won 3 times in a row. You're cheating, Reed accused. I'm just better at reading people than you are. That's definitely cheating, Vivian grinned. Prove it. They stayed up late, laughing and talking and playing cards until the fire burned low. When Vivian finally went to bed, she realized something had shifted. They'd crossed some invisible line from strangers to something more. Not lovers, not yet. But friends, maybe. Partners learning to trust each other. The blizzard lasted 5 days. By the time it cleared, the ranch was buried under 3 feet of snow, and Reed and Vivian had learned to live together without killing each other. They'd learned each other's rhythms, habits, quirks. Reed was moody in the mornings until he had coffee. Vivian hummed while she cooked. Reed read every night before bed. Vivian talked to the animals like they were people. When the storm finally broke and Reed could check the property, Vivian went with him. They trudged through snow together, checking fences and animals, making sure everything had survived. It was brutal work, but they moved as a team now, anticipating each other's movements. We lost part of the north fence, Reed said, surveying the damage, and the barn roof's going to need repairs before the next storm. I'll help, Vivian said immediately. Reed looked at her, something warm in his expression. I know you will. That night, after dinner and cleanup, they sat by the fire as usual. But this time, Vivian didn't go upstairs immediately. She stayed, curled into the corner of the sofa, watching flames dance. Reed? Yeah? Thank you. For what? For giving me a chance when you didn't have to. Vivian looked at him. For seeing past the lies to who I was trying to become. Reed was quiet for a moment. Then he moved to sit beside her, not touching, but close. I almost sent you away, he admitted. That first day at the train station. I was so angry I could barely think straight. Spent months imagining a future that turned out to be fake. I'm sorry. Don't be. Because if you'd been Catherine Wells, the real one, I'd be married to someone I built up in letters. Someone who might not have been real either, just in a different way. Reed turned to face her. You lied about your name and your past, but everything you've shown me since, your courage, your stubbornness, the way you refuse to give up, that's been real. I'd rather have that than perfect letters any day. Vivian's throat tightened. I'm not who you wanted. No, you're who I needed. Reed reached over and took her hand. Someone strong enough to survive this life. Someone brave enough to try. They sat like that for a long time, hands joined, watching the fire burn down. When Vivian finally went to bed, she carried that warmth with her. Over the next weeks, the ranch became home in ways Vivian hadn't expected. She learned to love the work despite its difficulty, the isolation despite occasional loneliness, the harsh beauty of Montana winter. She got stronger, tougher, more capable. The woman who'd arrived in silk and terror felt like a stranger now. But the biggest change was Reed. He opened up slowly, like ice thawing. He smiled more, joked occasionally, let Vivian see the man beneath the walls he'd built. They worked side by side during the day and sat together in the evenings. The separate bedrooms remained separate, but the distance between them was shrinking. One morning in late December, Vivian woke to shouting outside. She ran downstairs and found Reed staring toward the mountains, his face grim. What's wrong? Smoke, Reed pointed, coming from the direction of the Atkins ranch. Something's burning. They saddled horses immediately and rode toward the smoke. By the time they arrived, the Atkins family was standing in their yard watching their barn collapse in flames. The house was safe, but everything in the barn, tools, supplies, winter feed, was gone. What happened? Reed demanded. Tom Atkins looked shell-shocked. Lantern fell, knocked over by the wind. Whole thing went up before we could stop it. Reed assessed the situation quickly. You got enough supplies to make it through winter? Not anymore. Reed turned to Vivian. She saw the question in his eyes and nodded before he could ask. You'll come to our place, Reed said. We've got room, and we'll share what we have until spring when you can rebuild. We couldn't. You can, and you will. Reed's voice left no room for argument. Load your family in the wagon. You're coming to Broken Creek. The Atkins family, Tom, his wife Clara, and their 2 children, moved into the ranch that afternoon. It was crowded and chaotic, and Vivian had to reorganize everything to make room, but she did it without complaint, working alongside Clara to set up sleeping spaces and share cooking duties. That night, with 10 people around a table meant for 2, Vivian looked at Reed and saw him watching her with something that might have been pride or admiration or both. Thank you, he mouthed. She smiled and went back to serving dinner. The Atkins stayed for 3 weeks until Tom could arrange temporary shelter and supplies through town assistance. During that time, Vivian learned what it meant to manage a household under pressure. She cooked for 10, mediated arguments between children, kept everyone warm and fed while winter raged outside. When the Atkins finally left, Tom shook Reed's hand with tears in his eyes. You saved our lives. Vivian did most of the work, Reed said honestly. Tom turned to her. We won't forget this. Ever. After they left, the house felt enormous and quiet. Reed and Vivian stood in the main room, surrounded by evidence of 3 weeks of organized chaos. We survived that, Vivian said. Barely. But Reed was smiling. Think we can survive anything? I think we might. Reed stepped closer, and Vivian's heart started racing. He reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away, and brushed a strand of hair from her face. Vivian, he said quietly, I think I'm falling in love with you. The words hung between them, weighted and real. You think? Vivian managed. I know. I'm just scared to say it. Reed's hand moved to cup her face. I'm not good at this. At feelings. But I can't keep pretending what I feel is just friendship or partnership or convenience. Then don't pretend. Vivian leaned into his touch. I'm falling too. Reed kissed her. Gentle at first, then deeper when she responded. It was nothing like the romantic novels Vivian had read in New York. It was clumsy and uncertain and real, and when they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard. So, Reed said, what now? Vivian laughed. I have no idea. Want to figure it out together? Yes. That night, Vivian moved her things into Reed's room, not because it was expected or required, but because she wanted to. Because the marriage that had started as a legal protection had become something neither of them planned, but both of them needed. They still fought, still made mistakes, still struggled with communication and trust and all the messy parts of building a relationship from scratch. But they were building it together, one hard-earned day at a time. And for the first time in years, Vivian felt like she was exactly where she belonged. The first morning Vivian woke in Reed's bed, sunlight was barely touching the horizon, and he was already gone. She found him in the barn, mucking stalls in the pre-dawn cold, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. You could have woken me, she said from the doorway. Reed looked up, surprise flickering across his face. Didn't want to disturb you. I'm your wife. Disturb me. Vivian grabbed a second pitchfork from the wall. Show me how to do this properly. They worked side by side as the sun rose, and Vivian realized this was what her life would be now. Not romance and passion every moment, but partnership in the daily grind of survival. Reed showing her how to angle the pitchfork to move hay efficiently, her hands blistering again from new work. Both of them smelling like animals in sweat by the time they finished. It was nothing like the life she'd imagined back in New York, and it was better than anything she'd dared to hope for since. January brought cold that made December look mild. Temperatures dropped so low that water froze solid within minutes of being drawn from the well. Reed and Vivian developed a routine: wake before dawn, tend animals, manage the house, work until exhaustion, collapse into bed. Some nights they were too tired for anything beyond sleep. Other nights, they discovered each other slowly, learning what it meant to be married in all the ways that mattered. I'm not good at this, Reed said one night, frustrated with his own awkwardness. Neither am I. Vivian kissed him. We'll figure it out. And they did, through trial and error and patience they didn't know they possessed. But the real test came on a morning in mid-January when Vivian woke feeling wrong. Not sick exactly, but off. She made breakfast, but the smell of bacon turned her stomach. She ran outside and vomited in the snow. Reed found her there, pale and shaking. What's wrong? I don't know. Something I ate, maybe. It happened again the next day. And the next. By the fourth morning, Reed was watching her with an expression Vivian couldn't quite read. How long since your last monthly bleeding? He asked quietly. Vivian froze. She thought back, counting weeks, and her stomach dropped. I don't know. I wasn't paying attention. You think you might be... No! The word came out too fast. It's too soon. We've only been... it hasn't been that long since... Reed sat down heavily at the table. It only takes once, Vivian. She stood in the kitchen, one hand pressed to her stomach, terror and something else warring inside her. A baby. The possibility had existed in theory, but facing it as reality was different. She wasn't ready. They weren't ready. The ranch was barely managing to support 2 people, and winter wasn't even half over. What do we do? She whispered. Reed looked at her, and his expression softened. We wait. See if you're right. And if you are... He stood and crossed to her, taking her hands. If you are, we figure it out. Same as everything else. I don't know how to be a mother. I don't know how to be a father. Reed's thumb brushed across her knuckles. But I didn't know how to be a husband either, and we're managing. 2 weeks later, Doc Williams confirmed it. Vivian was pregnant. The baby would come in late summer, probably August. The doctor gave her a list of things to expect, warnings about the dangers of frontier childbirth, and instructions to rest more than she probably would. You'll be fine, he said, though his tone suggested he'd seen enough women die in childbirth to know it wasn't guaranteed. You're young and healthy. Just be careful, don't overwork yourself, and for heaven's sake, don't do anything stupid. Vivian and Reed rode back to the ranch in silence. The news sat between them like a living thing, impossible to ignore. Are you angry? Vivian asked finally. No. Reed kept his eyes on the road. Scared, maybe. This changes everything. I know, but not angry. He glanced at her. You? Terrified, Vivian admitted. I watched Emma Henderson nearly die bringing a baby into the world. What if I can't? What if something goes wrong? Then Doc Williams will be there, and I'll be there, and we'll do everything possible to keep you safe. Reed's voice was firm. You're not doing this alone. The pregnancy changed how they lived. Reed tried to take on more work to keep Vivian from overexerting herself, but she refused to be treated like glass. They fought about it constantly. I can still feed the chickens, Vivian snapped one morning when Reed tried to take the bucket from her hands. You're carrying my child. You should be resting. Your child is the size of a bean right now. I'm not resting for 6 months. She pushed past him toward the hen house. I'm pregnant, not dying. Reed followed, frustration evident. Doc Williams said not to overwork. Doc Williams says that to every pregnant woman. Then they ignore him and have healthy babies anyway. Vivian scattered feed and chickens swarmed her feet. I'm not sitting in the house doing nothing while you work yourself into exhaustion. I'm trying to protect you. I know, but you married a woman who ran to Montana to escape criminals. I'm not the type who needs protecting from chickens. Reed opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. After a moment, he started laughing. You're impossible. You're stubborn. Then we're matched. He kissed her forehead. Fine. Feed the chickens. But if you feel sick or tired, you tell me immediately. Deal. They learned to compromise. Vivian took on lighter tasks, and Reed shouldered the heavy labor. But she remained involved in everything, refusing to let pregnancy turn her into an invalid. She cooked, managed the house, helped with animals, and slowly watched her body change. By February, her morning sickness had mostly passed, replaced by exhaustion that hit like a hammer. Some days she could barely keep her eyes open past sunset. Reed would find her asleep in chairs on the sofa, once standing up against the kitchen counter. You need to rest more, he said, carrying her to bed for the 3rd time that week. I'm resting right now, Vivian mumbled against his shoulder. I mean, in an actual bed. Bed's upstairs, kitchen's closer. Reed laid her down and pulled blankets over her. Sleep. I'll handle dinner. You can't cook. I've been cooking for 15 years. You make stew every night, the same stew. But Vivian was already drifting off. Teach me something new. She woke hours later to the smell of burning food and Reed cursing in the kitchen. She smiled and went back to sleep. In early March, 3 children went missing in the mountains north of Silver Hollow. The town erupted into panic. Search parties formed immediately, but the terrain was brutal and the weather worse. Reed heard about it when he went to town for supplies and came home looking grim. I need to help search, he told Vivian. 3 kids, ages 6 to 10. Been missing since yesterday afternoon. Then go. Vivian was already moving to pack him food and supplies. You'll be alone here. I've been alone before. She handed him the pack. Find those children, Reed. He kissed her hard and fast, then rode out with a group of ranchers and townsmen. Vivian spent that day trying not to imagine all the ways children could die in Montana wilderness. Exposure, falls, animals, getting lost in terrain that all looked the same. By nightfall, there was still no news. She went to bed but couldn't sleep. Around midnight, she heard horses. She ran downstairs to find Reed and 4 other men in the yard, and with them, wrapped in blankets and looking terrified but alive, were 3 children. You found them, Vivian breathed. Trapped in an old mine shaft, one of the men said. Reed heard them calling. We never would have found them without him. Reed was helping the children down, checking them for injuries. His hands were gentle despite their size, his voice calm despite obvious exhaustion. Vivian watched him and felt something shift in her chest. This man, this rough, closed-off rancher who claimed he didn't know how to care for people, was going to be a father. And suddenly, she wasn't as terrified anymore. The children's families arrived within the hour, summoned by riders who'd gone ahead with news. There were tears, relief, gratitude that bordered on worship. The Hollis family, whose daughter had been among the missing, kept thanking Reed until he looked actively uncomfortable. Just did what anyone would do, he muttered. You saved our babies, Mrs. Hollis said, crying. We'll never forget this. After everyone left, Reed came inside looking ready to collapse. Vivian had coffee and food waiting. He ate mechanically, exhaustion written in every line of his body. "You were incredible today," Vivian said quietly. "I got lucky. If I hadn't heard them calling, but you did. You kept looking when you could have given up." She touched his hand. "Those children are alive because of you." Reed looked at her, something vulnerable in his expression. "I kept thinking about our baby, about how terrified those parents were. If something happened to our child—" He stopped, his jaw working. "Nothing's going to happen." Vivian squeezed his hand. "Because they'll have you as a father. Someone who rides into mountains to save children he doesn't even know." "I don't know how to be a father." "You'll learn. Same as everything else." She smiled. "And I'll be there, making mistakes right beside you." Reed pulled her close, and they stood like that in the kitchen, holding each other while the night wind rattled the windows. April brought the first hints of spring. Snow melted, revealing dead grass that would soon turn green. Birds returned. The ranch came back to life. Vivian's pregnancy was showing now, her belly rounding in a way that made her feel both proud and self-conscious. She caught Reed looking at her sometimes with an expression she couldn't quite name. Awe, maybe, or fear, or both. "What?" she asked one evening when his staring became obvious. "Nothing, just, you're growing a person." Reed shook his head. "It's strange." "It's strange from this side, too." Vivian touched her stomach. "Something moving around inside me, kicking me from the inside. It's bizarre." "Does it hurt?" "Not yet. Right now it just feels weird." She guided his hand to her belly. "Here, feel." Reed's hand was warm through her dress. They waited, and then a flutter against his palm. His eyes went wide. That's your child saying hello." Reed kept his hand there, waiting for another movement. When it came, he smiled in a way Vivian had never seen before. Unguarded, pure. "Hello," he said softly to her stomach. "I'm your father. I don't know what I'm doing, but I promise I'll try my best." Vivian felt tears prick her eyes. "Reed." "What?" "I love you." He looked up at her and his expression was everything. "I love you too, both of you." But spring also brought news that shattered their growing peace. A rider came to the ranch one afternoon in late April. A stranger, well-dressed, with cold eyes that Vivian recognized immediately. "Mrs. Calloway," the man said, tipping his hat. "Or should I say Mrs. Mercer?" Vivian's blood went cold. Reed stepped forward, positioning himself between her and the stranger. "Who are you?" Reed demanded. "Thomas Grant. I'm an investigator working for Victor Crane." The man smiled without warmth. "I believe you're harboring a fugitive, Mr. Calloway. A woman who owes my employer a significant sum of money. My wife owes nothing. Your wife stole another woman's identity, committed fraud, and fled New York to avoid paying her debts." Grant pulled out papers. "I have documentation, arrest warrants, testimony from Catherine Wells herself, who's quite eager to see justice served." Vivian felt the world tilt. Catherine was alive, and she'd told Crane everything. "Get off my property," Reed said, his voice dangerous. "I'll be happy to, as soon as Mrs. Mercer agrees to return to New York and settle her accounts." Grant looked at Vivian. "Mr. Crane is willing to be reasonable. Come back, work off your debt, and no criminal charges will be filed." "Work it off how?" Reed's hand moved toward his gun. "Mr. Crane owns several legitimate businesses. I'm sure we can find appropriate employment." "Brothels," Vivian said flatly. "He owns brothels." Grant's smile widened. "Legitimate businesses, Mrs. Mercer. All properly licensed." "She's not going anywhere," Reed said. "Then I'll return with the sheriff and a federal warrant." Grant tipped his hat again. "You have 3 days to decide, Mrs. Mercer. Make the right choice." He rode away, leaving devastation in his wake. Vivian stood in this yard, one hand pressed to her pregnant belly, and tried not to fall apart. Reed turned to her, his face set in hard lines. "We're not letting him take you." "He has warrants, Reed, legal documents. If he comes back with the sheriff, then we fight it. Get lawyers, challenge the warrants." Reed gripped her shoulders. "You're not going back to Crane. I don't care what papers that bastard has." What if we can't fight it? What if the law says I have to go? Vivian's voice cracked. I'm carrying your child. If they take me to New York, I'll be trapped in one of Crane's brothels until I either die or work off a debt designed to never be paid. And our baby? She couldn't finish the sentence. Reed pulled her close. That's not happening. Do you hear me? That's not happening. But they both knew the law didn't care about what was right or fair. It cared about documentation and debt and the letter of contracts Vivian had signed in desperation. That night, they barely slept. They talked through every option, every possibility, running again, but this time with a pregnant woman and limited resources. Fighting in court, but with what money and which lawyers? Standing their ground and refusing to cooperate, but that meant prison for both of them. There has to be a way, Vivian said as dawn approached. Something we're not seeing. Reed stared at the ceiling, his mind clearly racing. What if we pay the debt? It's $10,000. We don't have that. The ranch is worth more than that. I could sell it. No. Vivian sat up. Absolutely not. This ranch is your life's work. I won't let you destroy it for me. Then what good is it? Reed looked at her, fierce and desperate. What's the point of having anything if I can't protect you with it? We'll find another way. There is no other way, Vivian. That investigator isn't bluffing. In 3 days, he'll come back with law enforcement, and they'll take you, unless we give Crane what he wants. And what about after? Vivian demanded. After you sell everything you built, we'll have nothing. No home, no income, no way to support ourselves or a baby. We'll be right back where we started, except this time we'll both be broken. They argued in circles until exhaustion won. Finally, Reed made a decision. I'm riding to town, he said, talking to the sheriff, getting legal advice, seeing what our real options are. You stay here, stay safe, and don't open the door for anyone except me or someone you trust completely. Reed, please. He cupped her face. Let me try to fix this. He left at sunrise, and Vivian spent the day pacing, trying to think, fighting panic. She cleaned obsessively, cooked food no one would eat, talked to her unborn child like the baby could offer advice. Your father's trying to save us, she said, one hand on her belly. But I don't know if it's possible. The world doesn't forgive women like me. Women who made desperate choices and paid for them with everything. The baby kicked, and despite everything, Vivian smiled. Reed returned after dark with news both good and terrible. The sheriff had confirmed that Grant's warrants were legitimate. Vivian could be arrested and extradited to New York to face fraud charges. But there was one possibility. If the debt is paid in full, Crane has to drop the charges, Reed said. It's in the contract you signed. Full payment means freedom. We don't have $10,000. No, but I talked to the bank. With the ranch as collateral, I can take out a loan. It'll take everything. I'll be in debt for years, but it's possible. Vivian stared at him. You'd do that? Mortgage your entire ranch? Risk everything you've built? Without hesitation, Reed took her hands. This ranch is wood and land. You're my wife. You're carrying my child. There's no comparison. But if something goes wrong, if we can't make the payments, then we lose the ranch and start over somewhere else. Reed's expression was resolute. I've built one ranch from nothing. I can build another. But I can't replace you. Tears streamed down Vivian's face. Reed, I can't ask you to do this. You're not asking. I'm offering. He pulled her close. Let me protect you. Let me fix the mess that bastard Crane created. This is what husbands do. Not all husbands. Then I'm not all husbands. Reed kissed her forehead. I'm yours. And you're mine. And we protect what's ours. The next morning, Reed rode back to town and signed papers that put Broken Creek Ranch in the bank's name. The loan terms were brutal. 15 years of payments with interest that would take decades to fully resolve. But the money was wired to New York, and by afternoon, Thomas Grant received confirmation that Vivian Mercer's debt to Victor Crane was paid in full. Grant came to the ranch one final time to deliver the documentation. Mr. Crane accepts payment, he said, handing over papers. Mrs. Mercer is released from all obligations. The criminal charges will be dropped. And Catherine Wells? Vivian asked. She's been compensated for the identity theft. Consider the matter closed. Grant tipped his hat. Good day, Mrs. Calloway. Enjoy your freedom. He rode away, and Vivienne watched him disappear down the road with papers clutched in her shaking hands. Free. After months of terror, she was actually free. But the cost was staggering. That night, Vivienne and Reed sat in the house that was no longer fully theirs, surrounded by the life they'd built together, and faced the reality of what freedom meant. We'll manage the payments, Reed said, though his voice carried doubt. The ranch produces enough income if we're careful. And if we have a bad year, if the cattle get sick or the weather turns against us, then we'll figure it out. Reed looked exhausted. Vivienne, I made this choice. I don't regret it. Don't ask me to. I'm not. She touched his face. I hate that you had to sacrifice everything for my mistakes. They weren't mistakes. They were survival. Reed covered her hand with his. And this ranch isn't everything. You are. The baby is. We're building a family, Vivienne, that's worth more than land or money or any of it. You mean that? Every word. They held each other in the gathering dark. Two people who'd started as strangers and become partners through fire and desperation. The ranch was mortgaged. Their future was uncertain, but they were together, and they were free, and for now, that had to be enough. May arrived with wildflowers and warming days. Vivienne's pregnancy advanced, her belly growing round and obvious. She moved more slowly now, tired easily, but remained determined to contribute. She tended the garden they'd planted together, cooked meals, managed the house. Reed worked himself to exhaustion trying to keep the ranch profitable enough to make loan payments. They were surviving, but barely. One evening, Reed came in from the fields looking defeated. North pasture fence is falling apart. Needs replacing, but we don't have money for new materials. Can we repair it with what we have? Temporarily, but it won't last. Reed sat heavily. We need a good cattle sale this fall. Without it, we'll miss our loan payment. Then we'll have a good sale, Vivienne said with more confidence than she felt. You can't just decide that. No, but I can decide we're not giving up. She moved to stand behind him, massaging his tight shoulders. We've survived everything else. We'll survive this too. Reed leaned back against her pregnant belly. When did you become the optimistic one? When you mortgaged your entire life to save mine. Someone has to believe it was worth it. It was worth it, Reed said firmly. Even if we lose everything tomorrow, it was worth it. In mid-May, Doc Williams came to check on Vivienne's pregnancy. Everything looked good. The baby was healthy. Vivienne was managing well despite the stress. But the doctor pulled Reed aside afterward with a warning. She's doing fine physically, Doc Williams said quietly. But I'm worried about her mental state. The stress of the debt, the pregnancy, nearly being taken back to New York, it's a lot for anyone to handle. What should I do? Make sure she knows she's not alone. Women can spiral during pregnancy, especially when circumstances are difficult. She needs to know you're there, that you don't blame her, that she's not carrying all this guilt alone. Reed nodded slowly. That night, he made Vivienne her favorite meal, which he'd learned to cook through trial and error, and they ate on the porch watching the sunset. This is nice, Vivienne said softly. It's just dinner. No, it's you showing me you care. That's different. She looked at him. Doc Williams talked to you, didn't he? He's worried about you. I'm fine. Vivienne, Reed set down his fork. You don't have to be fine. You can be scared or angry or overwhelmed. You don't have to pretend for me. I'm not pretending. You are. I see it. Reed reached across the small table and took her hand. You wake up in the middle of the night terrified. You apologize constantly for things that aren't your fault. You act like you don't deserve to be happy here. Because I don't, Vivienne whispered. You lost everything because of me. I gained everything because of you. Reed squeezed her hand. A wife who challenges me. A baby on the way. A reason to build something beyond just existing. Before you, I was surviving. Now I'm living. That's worth any price. Tears spilled down Vivienne's cheeks. What if we can't make the payments? What if we lose the ranch anyway? Then we lose it and we start over. Reed's voice was steady. But we start over together. That's what matters. They finished dinner in comfortable silence, and for the first time in weeks, Vivienne felt the crushing weight of guilt lift slightly. Not gone, but manageable. June brought their first real crisis as a married couple when 3 of Reed's cattle got sick with something Doc Williams couldn't immediately diagnose. If it spread to the whole herd, they'd lose everything. Reed quarantined the sick animals and watched the others obsessively, checking for symptoms every few hours. Vivian stayed up with him those nights, both of them taking turns monitoring the herd. She was 7 months pregnant now, exhausted and uncomfortable, but refused to leave Reed to worry alone. "You should be sleeping," Reed said on the 3rd night. "So should you." "The cattle are my responsibility." "They're our responsibility." Vivian shifted, trying to find a comfortable position on the porch steps. "Everything here is ours now, the debts, the risks, the hope. All of it." Reed looked at her, backlit by lamplight, pregnant and stubborn and beautiful. "How did I get this lucky?" "Lucky?" Vivian laughed. "You married a woman who brought debt collectors and criminal warrants to your door." "I married a woman who fights for everything she loves." Reed sat beside her, careful of her belly. "That includes me, apparently." "Apparently?" She leaned against him. "Think the cattle will be all right?" "I don't know, but we'll handle it either way." By the end of the week, the sick cattle recovered and the illness didn't spread. Reed looked 10 years older from stress, but they'd survived another crisis. The ranch continued, battered but standing. July arrived with heat that made Vivian's pregnancy even more uncomfortable. She was huge now, moving slowly, unable to do half the tasks she wanted. It frustrated her to exhaustion. Reed tried to help, but that frustrated her more. "I'm not an invalid," she snapped one afternoon when Reed tried to take laundry from her hands. "You're 9 months pregnant in 100-degree heat. And I'm still capable of hanging clothes." Vivian grabbed the basket back. "Stop treating me like I'm made of glass." They fought more in those final weeks. Both of them were stressed and exhausted and scared about the birth that was coming, whether they were ready or not. Small disagreements exploded into real arguments. Vivian accused Reed of being controlling. Reed accused Vivian of being reckless with her health. They said things they didn't mean, then apologized, then fought again. "We're falling apart," Vivian said after a particularly bad fight in early August. "No, we're just terrified." Reed pulled her close despite her resistance. "We're about to become parents. We're drowning in debt. We're both exhausted. We're allowed to be a mess." "I don't want to be a mess." "Too bad. We're human." Reed kissed the top of her head. "We'll fight. We'll make up. We'll keep going. That's marriage." "This isn't what I expected marriage to be." "Me neither." Reed's hand rested on her pregnant belly. "But I wouldn't trade it for anything." On August 15th, Vivian woke at 3 in the morning with pain radiating through her back. She knew immediately what it meant. "Reed," she said quietly, "the baby's coming." Reed bolted awake, panic clear in his eyes. "Now?" "Now." What followed was controlled chaos. Reed rode for Doc Williams while Vivian tried to stay calm and remember everything she'd learned helping Emma Henderson. The pain came in waves, increasing in intensity and frequency. By the time Doc Williams arrived at dawn, Vivian was in active labor and terrified. "You're doing fine," the doctor said, examining her. "Baby's positioned correctly. This should be straightforward." Should be. Vivian heard all the ways that could go wrong. Reed stayed with her, holding her hand, talking to her through the contractions. Hours passed in a blur of pain and fear and exhaustion. Vivian screamed, cried, begged for it to be over. Reed stayed steady, his hand in hers, his voice constant. "You can do this," he said over and over. "You're the strongest person I know, just a little longer." When the baby finally came, after 18 hours of labor that felt like an eternity, Vivian was too exhausted to do anything except sob with relief. Doc Williams held up a tiny, screaming infant. "It's a girl," he announced. "Healthy lungs, all fingers and toes accounted for." Reed stared at his daughter with an expression of such complete wonder that Vivian started crying all over again. The doctor cleaned the baby and handed her to Vivian, and she looked down at the tiny face that was somehow both familiar and strange. "Hello," Vivian whispered. "We're your parents. We have no idea what we're doing, but we're going to love you so much." The baby stopped crying and looked at her with unfocused eyes. Reed reached out tentatively and touched one tiny fist. His daughter gripped his finger, and his face crumpled. "She's perfect," he said roughly. "She's ours," Vivian corrected. They named her Sarah, after the Brennan girl who'd been one of Vivian's first students. Sarah Calloway, born into debt and uncertainty, but surrounded by more love than either parent had ever expected to feel. Doc Williams stayed to make sure both mother and baby were stable, then left with instructions and a promise to check in daily. Reed and Vivian were left alone with their daughter, staring at her like she might disappear if they looked away. "What do we do now?" Reed asked. "I have no idea." Vivian touched Sarah's tiny hand. "But we'll figure it out. Together?" "Together." Outside, the Montana sun climbed higher, beginning another brutal summer day. Inside the mortgaged ranch house, a family that had been built from lies and desperation and hard-earned trust held each other and faced an uncertain future with hope they hadn't known they possessed. The first week with Sarah was a lesson in survival neither Reed nor Vivian had prepared for. The baby cried at all hours, needed constant feeding, and slept in unpredictable bursts that left both parents stumbling through days in exhausted hazes. Vivian's body ached from the birth, and Reed looked like he'd aged 5 years and 7 days. "I don't think I've slept more than 2 hours at a time," Vivian said one morning, rocking Sarah while trying to drink cold coffee with her free hand. Reed looked up from feeding chickens through the window, a task he'd taken over completely. "I can take her tonight. You need rest." "You need rest too. You're running the entire ranch alone right now. And you just grew and birthed a human." Reed came inside, taking Sarah gently from her arms. "Go back to bed. Sleep until she's hungry again. I'll manage." Vivian wanted to argue, but exhaustion won. She went upstairs and collapsed into bed, unconscious within seconds. She woke 4 hours later to silence, the kind that made a new mother's heart stop. She ran downstairs and found Reed on the porch, Sarah asleep against his chest, his hand supporting her tiny head. He was humming something tuneless, swaying slightly, looking at his daughter like she was made of starlight. "She finally settled," he said quietly when he noticed Vivian. "Been holding her like this for an hour, afraid to move." Vivian's heart cracked open watching them. "You're a good father, Reed." "I'm terrified every second." "That makes you a good father." She sat beside him. "Bad fathers don't worry about getting it right." They sat together in the August heat, their daughter sleeping between them, and neither mentioned the loan payment due in 3 weeks, or the fence that still needed repairs, or any of the 100 other problems waiting for attention. For that moment, they were just parents learning to love something bigger than themselves. By September, they'd found a rhythm. Vivian's strength returned slowly, and she took back some of the household work. Reed managed the ranch with single-minded determination, working from before dawn until after dark. Sarah grew and changed daily, her tiny features becoming more defined, her cries developing different meanings they were learning to interpret. The town threw them a small celebration when Vivian brought Sarah to church for the first time. Women who'd once whispered about her crowded around, offering advice and congratulations. Mrs. Patterson cried. Pastor Grant blessed the baby with words that made even Reed's eyes wet. "You've become part of this community," Martha Hendricks told Vivian. "Not because of where you came from, but because of who you proved yourself to be." It was the acceptance Vivian had been fighting for since stepping off that train a year ago. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt fragile, something that could still be taken away if they couldn't make the loan payment in 2 weeks. That night, Reed sat at his desk with the ranch ledgers spread before him, adding numbers that refused to cooperate. Vivian came downstairs after putting Sarah to bed and found him with his head in his hands. "How bad?" she asked quietly. "We're $200 short." Reed's voice was hollow. "The cattle sale was decent, but not enough. We miss this payment, the bank can start foreclosure proceedings." "Can we sell something? Animals? Equipment? Already sold everything we can spare. If we sell more, we won't be able to operate the ranch." Reed looked up, defeat written across his face. "I don't know what to do, Vivian. I've been over these numbers 100 times and I can't make them work." Vivian sat down heavily. $200. An impossible amount and an insultingly small one at the same time. After everything they'd survived, they were going to lose the ranch over $200. "What if I went back to teaching?" she offered. "The school would take me back." "That wouldn't pay enough fast enough." Reed closed the ledger. "We need the money in 2 weeks." They sat in silence, the weight of failure pressing down on them. Sarah cried upstairs, and Vivian went to comfort her, leaving Reed alone with numbers that wouldn't save them. The next morning, Reed rode into town to talk to the bank manager, hoping for an extension or payment plan. He returned 3 hours later, looking worse. "They won't budge," he told Vivian. "Said they've been lenient already, given us good terms. Miss this payment, and they start foreclosure within 30 days. There has to be something." "There's not," Reed's voice cracked. "I've tried everything. We're out of options." Vivian felt panic rising. The ranch was their home, their livelihood, their future. Without it, they had nothing. Nowhere to go with a newborn. No income. They'd be right back where she'd started, desperate and running. That afternoon, Mrs. Patterson came to visit, bringing food and supplies for Sarah. She found Vivian crying in the kitchen and, without asking questions, pulled her into a hug. "What's wrong, dear?" Vivian told her everything: the loan, the shortfall, the foreclosure threat. Mrs. Patterson listened quietly, then said something unexpected. "You need to tell the town." "What?" "Tell them what's happening. You'd be surprised what people can do when they know someone needs help." Mrs. Patterson squeezed her hand. "You've helped half this town over the last year. Let them help you back." "We can't ask for charity." "It's not charity, it's community." The older woman stood. "I'm going to talk to some people. You just hold on." She left before Vivian could argue. 3 hours later, Pastor Grant appeared at the ranch with news. "We're having a town meeting tomorrow night," he said, "to discuss the Calloway situation." Reed looked horrified. "We don't want— I know what you want. You want to suffer alone and lose your ranch with dignity." Grant's expression was firm. "But that's not how this works. You've given to this community. Now let us give back." The next evening, Reed and Vivian rode into town with Sarah, both of them dreading what was coming. The church was packed. Families they knew, ranchers they'd helped, townspeople they'd barely spoken to. Martha Hendricks stood at the front with a ledger. "We've taken up a collection," she announced, "for the Calloways." Reed saved 3 children in the mountains. Vivian helped during the fever outbreak and delivered Emma Henderson's baby. They took in the Atkins family when their barn burned. They've given to this community without asking anything in return. "We didn't do those things for payment," Reed said, uncomfortable with all the attention. "We know that. That's why we're doing this." Martha held up the ledger. "We've collected $193. It's not quite enough, but—" "Wait," Tom Brennan stood up from the back. "My family owes the Calloways more than money. Vivian cared for us for 6 weeks while I healed. We've been saving to repay her properly." He walked forward and placed bills on the table. $50. Reed started to protest, but others were already coming forward. $5 from the Henderson family, $10 from the Atkins, $20 from a rancher Reed had helped repair fences, small amounts from families that barely had enough themselves. "We're not taking your money," Reed said, his voice rough. "You all have your own struggles." "And you helped us through them," someone called out. "Let us help you." Within 20 minutes, the collection reached $370, more than they needed. Reed looked at the money, then at the room full of people who'd become more than neighbors, and his face crumpled. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll stay," Mrs. Patterson said. "This town needs the Calloways." Vivian was crying openly. She'd spent so long believing she didn't deserve kindness, that every good thing would be taken away. But here was an entire community proving her wrong. "Thank you," she managed. "Thank you all." They used the money to make the loan payment, with enough left over to repair the fence and buy supplies for winter. The bank manager accepted it with barely concealed surprise. Clearly he'd expected them to fail. Reed walked out of the bank with the receipt in hand and looked at Vivian. "We're going to make it," he said wonderingly. "We're actually going to make it." "We are." Vivian adjusted Sarah in her arms. "Because we're not doing it alone anymore." The reprieve gave them breathing room, but the debt remained. They still owed the bank 14 more years of payments. The pressure was constant, a weight they carried through every day. But knowing the town would help if they truly needed it made the burden lighter. October brought cooler weather and the busiest time on the ranch. Reed worked dawn to dusk preparing for winter, and Vivian managed the house and Sarah while helping where she could. They fell into bed exhausted each night, too tired for much beyond holding each other. "I miss you," Vivian said one evening. "I know we're together all the time, but I miss you." Reed pulled her closer. I know what you mean. Between the ranch and Sarah and the debt, we haven't had time to just be us. Think we'll ever get that back? I hope so. He kissed her forehead. But even if we don't, even if this is our life now, I'd rather have this chaos with you than peace with anyone else. That's not exactly romantic. Never said I was good at romance. But Reed was smiling. I'm good at showing up, at staying, at fighting for what matters. That's what I can offer. That's more than enough. Vivian kissed him properly. That's everything. In November, 3 separate crises hit within a week. First, Sarah got sick with a fever that had Doc Williams worried. Then an early blizzard killed 5 cattle. Then the barn roof partially collapsed under snow weight, requiring emergency repairs they couldn't afford. Reed looked ready to break. Vivian watched him spiral into exhaustion and frustration, snapping at minor problems, losing patience with everything. One night she found him in the barn at midnight, trying to fix the roof alone in freezing temperatures. Reed, come inside. Can't. This needs to be done. It can wait until morning. No, it can't. Reed drove a nail with more force than necessary. If it collapses completely, we lose the whole structure. Can't afford to replace it, can't afford anything, can't even keep my daughter healthy. Sarah's fever broke. She's fine. This time, Reed's voice cracked. But what about next time? What if she gets really sick and we can't afford medicine? What if I can't protect her? Can't protect you? Can't keep this ranch running despite working every waking hour? Vivian climbed up beside him, ignoring the cold and height. Reed, stop! I can't stop. If I stop, everything falls apart. Everything's already fallen apart. Vivian took the hammer from his hand. We lost 5 cattle, the barn's damaged. We're exhausted and scared and barely holding on. And none of that is your fault. I'm supposed to provide. You're providing. You're here. You're trying. You're fighting for us every single day. Vivian forced him to look at her. But you can't do it alone, and you don't have to. I'm here. The town's here. We're all in this together. Reed's face twisted. I'm so tired, Vivian. I know. Me too. She pulled him into a hug. So let's go inside, get warm, sleep for a few hours, and tackle this tomorrow. Together. They went inside, and Reed finally let himself rest. The next morning, he woke to find Tom Brennan and 5 other ranchers in his yard, ready to help repair the barn. They worked all day, refusing payment, and by evening, the roof was fixed. Why? Reed asked Tom. You've got your own ranch to manage. Because last winter you helped me when I couldn't walk. Because your wife took care of my family. Tom clapped him on the shoulder. This is what neighbors do. December brought Christmas, and with it, unexpected news. Pastor Grant came to the ranch with a letter that had arrived from New York. Vivian opened it with shaking hands, afraid it was more trouble from Crane. Instead, it was from Catherine Wells. The real Catherine Wells. Dear Mrs. Calloway, the letter began, I expect you're surprised to hear from me. I'm writing because I owe you an explanation and perhaps an apology. When you took my identity, I was angry. Furious, actually. I'd spent months corresponding with Mr. Calloway, building a future in my mind, and you stole it. I reported you to Mr. Crane hoping for justice. But then I met him. I saw what kind of man he is, what kind of justice he represents. And I realized what you must have been running from. I'm ashamed it took me so long to understand. I received compensation for the identity theft, and I've used it to open a school here in Pennsylvania. I'm doing the work I love, in a place where I belong. I hope you found the same in Montana. I've instructed Mr. Crane that any further pursuit of you will result in legal action from me. He's agreed to leave you alone. Consider this my gift to you, the freedom I once wanted for myself. I hope Mr. Calloway is everything you need him to be, and I hope you've become the woman you were meant to become. Sincerely, Catherine Wells. Vivian read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. Reed read it over her shoulder, his arms coming around her. It's over, she whispered. It's really over. You're free. Reed kissed her temple. Completely free. They celebrated that night, a quiet celebration with just the 3 of them, but it felt monumental. The shadow that had hung over Vivian since New York was finally gone. She was Vivian Calloway, wife and mother and rancher, with nothing left to run from. Winter settled in hard, but they were ready this time. They'd learned from the previous year, stockpiled better, prepared for worst-case scenarios. The nights were long and cold, but the house was warm and full. Sarah grew and thrived, developing a personality that was equal parts Reed's stubbornness and Vivian's determination. "She's going to be a handful," Reed said one evening, watching his daughter refuse to sleep despite obvious exhaustion. "She's ours," Vivian corrected. "Of course she's a handful." In February, on the anniversary of Vivian's arrival at the ranch, Reed surprised her with a new dress. Not silk like the one she'd arrived in, but sturdy cotton in a color that matched her eyes. It was practical and beautiful, and he'd clearly spent money they didn't have. "Reed, we can't afford—" "I wanted to." Reed helped her into it. "Wanted you to have something that wasn't worn or borrowed or hand-me-down. Something that's just yours." Vivian looked at herself in the small mirror. She barely recognized the woman staring back. Gone was the terrified refugee and expensive silk. This woman had calloused hands and sun-weathered skin. She looked older than her years, but strong in ways the younger version had never been. "I look like I belong here," she said wonderingly. "You do belong here." Reed stood behind her, his hands on her shoulders. "You earned it." That night, after Sarah was asleep, they made love with the tenderness of people who'd fought through hell together. Afterward, lying tangled in sheets, Vivian said something she'd been thinking for months. "I'm glad Catherine didn't come." Reed propped himself up. "What?" "I'm glad I'm the one who stepped off that train. Glad I'm the one who married you." Vivian touched his face. "If she'd come instead, you'd have had a nice, uncomplicated marriage to someone appropriate, but I don't think you'd have this." "What's this?" "A partnership. Someone who knows what it's like to lose everything and rebuild from nothing. Someone who understands that love isn't just romance and easy moments, it's showing up when things are hard and choosing each other anyway." Vivian smiled. "Catherine would have been fine, but I don't think she'd have been right for you." Reed was quiet for a long moment. "I used to think I wanted simple. Someone uncomplicated who'd fit into my life without making waves." He pulled her closer. "But you're right. That's not what I needed. I needed someone who'd challenge me, push me, make me build a life instead of just surviving one." "Is that what we're doing? Building a life?" "Yeah." Reed kissed her. "A messy, difficult, beautiful life." Spring came late that year, but when it arrived, it brought renewal. The ranch awakened from winter, and Reed and Vivian worked side by side, planting, repairing, preparing for the season ahead. Sarah turned 9 months old, started crawling, got into everything, and brought chaos and joy in equal measure. The loan payments continued, steady and relentless, but they managed. Some months were easier than others. They learned to budget, to sacrifice, to find creative solutions. The townspeople continued helping when crisis struck, and Reed and Vivian returned the favor whenever possible. By summer, 2 years after Vivian had stepped off that train, the ranch had stabilized. They weren't wealthy and probably never would be, but they were surviving, building equity slowly, creating something that would last. One evening in July, Reed came in from the fields to find Vivian teaching Sarah to pet the barn cat gently. The sight stopped him in his tracks. His wife and daughter, bathed in golden light, laughing together. He'd never imagined this, never thought his life could hold this much. Vivian looked up and saw him watching. "What?" "Just thinking about that day at the train station, when you told me you'd lied about everything." "Having regrets?" But she was smiling, the opposite. Reed crossed to them, kneeling beside his family. "I'm thinking about how close I came to sending you away. How different everything would be if I had. You'd have waited for Catherine. Married her eventually. Maybe, but I wouldn't have this." Reed gestured at the house, the ranch, the life they'd built. "I wouldn't have you. Wouldn't have Sarah. Wouldn't have learned what it means to actually love someone instead of just tolerating their presence in my space." Vivian's eyes filled with tears. "That's the most romantic thing you've ever said to me." "Don't get used to it. I'm still terrible at this." "No, you're not." She kissed him softly. "You're exactly who you need to be." In August, on Sarah's first birthday, the whole town came to celebrate. They'd transformed from wary strangers who judged Vivian on arrival to a community that claimed the Calloways as their own. Children played in the yard. Adults shared food and stories, someone brought a fiddle, and there was dancing as the sun set. Reed watched it all with an expression of quiet wonder. Pastor Grant found him by the fence, both men observing the celebration. "You've built something good here," Grant said. "We almost lost it." "But you didn't. You held on, let people help, and came out stronger." The pastor smiled. "That's the lesson, I think. We're not meant to survive alone." Reed thought about that. All his life, he'd prided himself on independence, on building the ranch alone, needing no one, proving he could make it through sheer stubbornness. Then Vivian had arrived and blown that philosophy apart. She'd forced him to accept help, to build community, to understand that strength wasn't about isolation, it was about connection. "You're right," Reed said quietly. "Everything good in my life came from letting someone in instead of keeping everyone out." Vivian found him later, Sarah on her hip, both of them flushed from dancing. "Having fun?" she asked. "More than I knew possible." Reed took Sarah, who immediately grabbed his nose. "Thank you." "For what?" "For lying to me. For being desperate enough to steal someone's identity and show up here." Reed's voice was rough with emotion. "For refusing to give up when everyone expected you to. For forcing me to become someone better than I was." "Reed, let me finish." He shifted Sarah to one arm and took Vivian's hand with the other. "I've been thinking about what to say today, on Sarah's birthday. Some speech about being grateful or blessed or whatever, but the truth is simpler than that." He looked around at the ranch, the community, the life they'd built from desperation and determination. 2 years ago, a woman stepped off a train and destroyed every plan I'd made. She brought chaos and danger and debt. She forced me to mortgage everything I'd built, risk everything I had, and trust someone who'd lied to me for months. Reed looked at Vivian directly. "And she gave me a life worth living, a family worth fighting for, a future worth believing in." Vivian was crying openly now. "You gave me that too." "Then we're even." Reed pulled her close, their daughter between them. "And we'll keep building it, one hard day at a time." They stood together as the party continued around them. 3 people who'd become a family through the messiest, most imperfect path imaginable. The ranch that had almost been lost spread out behind them, marked with scars from every crisis they'd survived. The town that had rejected Vivian now celebrated her. The man who'd wanted a simple life had found something complicated and real instead. Years later, when Sarah was old enough to ask how her parents met, Reed and Vivian would tell her the truth. About lies and desperation, about a mail-order bride who never arrived, and the woman who stole her place. About debt and sacrifice, and learning to trust when trust seemed impossible. "So Mama lied to you?" Sarah would ask, scandalized. "She did," Reed would confirm. "And you forgave her?" "Eventually. After she proved herself 100 times over." Reed would pull Vivian close. "Sometimes the best things in life start with mistakes. The question isn't whether you make them. Everyone does. It's what you do after. Do you run, or do you stay and face what you've done?" "Mama stayed," Sarah would say with certainty. "She did. Even when staying was harder than running. Even when everyone expected her to quit." Reed would look at his wife, still seeing the terrified woman in silk and the strong rancher she'd become. That's what made all the difference. But that conversation was years away. For now, on Sarah's first birthday with the Montana sun setting behind the mountains and their community celebrating around them, Reed and Vivian simply held each other and their daughter and let themselves feel something they'd both given up hoping for. Peace. Not the peace of easy circumstances or wealth or certainty. The peace of knowing they'd found where they belonged, with someone who chose them despite, or maybe because of, all their imperfections. The ranch would always be difficult. The debt would take years to resolve. They'd face drought and disease, hard winters and harder choices. They'd fight and struggle and make mistakes. But they'd do it together, with a community that had their backs and a love that had been forged through fire. That night, after the last guest left and Sarah was asleep, Vivian and Reed stood on their porch looking at the land that was almost theirs again, slowly buying it back one payment at a time. "No regrets?" Vivian asked. "Not one." Reed put his arm around her. "You. I regret lying to you, stealing Catherine's identity, putting you at risk. But not staying? Never that." Vivian leaned into him. "Staying was the first honest thing I did. Everything after that was just learning to live with the consequences. Good consequences, though. The best. She looked up at him. I came here running from my past, thinking I could escape who I'd been. But you can't escape yourself. You can only decide who you want to become and do the work to get there. And who did you become? Vivienne thought about that. She'd been Vivienne Mercer, privileged, desperate, lying. She'd stolen Catherine Wells's identity, tried to be someone she wasn't. Now she was Vivienne Calloway, rancher, mother, wife, member of a community that had seen her at her worst and chosen to love her anyway. I became someone who doesn't run anymore, she said finally. Someone who faces problems instead of fleeing them. Someone strong enough to accept help and brave enough to offer it. That's who you always were. Reed kissed the top of her head. You just didn't know it yet. They stood together in comfortable silence as stars emerged overhead, the same stars that had watched them struggle through everything that brought them here. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The ranch would demand work. Sarah would need care. Bills would require payment. But tonight, they had this, a moment of hard-won peace, standing on land they'd nearly lost, holding on to each other and the life they'd built. Inside, Sarah stirred and cried softly. Vivienne went to her, lifting their daughter from the crib, soothing her back to sleep with whispered words and gentle rocking. Reed watched from the doorway, still marveling that this was his life, this messy, difficult, beautiful life. Vivienne looked at him over Sarah's head and smiled. Not the terrified smile of a woman with nowhere to go, but the genuine smile of someone who'd found home. And Reed smiled back, thinking about the woman in silk who'd destroyed his plans and given him something better. Thinking about all the ways love arrives, not in the packages we expect, not in the forms we imagine, but in the truth of people showing up, staying present, and choosing each other despite every reason not to. The ranch settled into night around them. Outside, the Montana wilderness stretched endlessly, beautiful and harsh and unforgiving. But inside, warmth and light and love pushed back the darkness. A family built from lies and desperation and stubborn courage faced the future together, one day at a time, proving that sometimes the most unexpected beginnings lead to the most extraordinary lives. Because in the end, it wasn't about perfect circumstances or flawless people or easy choices. It was about showing up when things got hard, about staying when running would be easier, about building trust brick by brick after it had been shattered, about learning that real strength isn't isolation. It's the courage to let others in, to accept help, to be vulnerable enough to love and be loved in return. Reed and Vivienne had learned those lessons the hard way, through fire and struggle and near destruction. But they'd learned them together, and that made all the difference. Their story wasn't perfect or romantic in the traditional sense. It was messy and difficult and real, and that made it more valuable than any fairy tale. Years from now, travelers passing through Silver Hollow would still hear whispers about the rancher and the woman who'd arrived under false pretenses. Some versions would make Vivienne a villain. Others would make Reed a fool. But the people who actually knew them, who'd watched them survive and struggle and build something lasting, those people knew the truth. They knew that sometimes love arrives wearing lies, and sometimes the worst beginnings lead to the best endings, and sometimes the most broken people create the strongest foundations. They knew that the Calloways had earned every inch of happiness they'd found, paid for it with sweat and sacrifice and stubborn refusal to give up. And they knew that on quiet Montana evenings, if you passed Broken Creek Ranch, you might see a family on the porch, a rancher who'd learned to open his heart, a woman who'd learned to stop running, and a little girl who represented every impossible hope they'd dared to believe in. A family built not on perfection, but on the hard, honest work of choosing each other. Again and again, through every storm. Until choosing became as natural as breathing. That was their legacy. Not romance or riches, but something more valuable. Proof that people can change, that communities can save each other, and that love built on truth and sacrifice will always be stronger than love built on easy lies. And in the end, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.